Welcome to Crimson Tales. Support me by subscribing my channel and like, comment, share my videos. Wool's Orphanage, a long-standing orphanage in London. It was a square building surrounded by high railings, appearing worn out on the outside but remarkably clean and tidy on the inside. The establishment's founding date was lost to history, and despite its considerable age, it lacked notable achievements. No famous merchants, politicians, or scholars had emerged from here, and it struggled to attract donations or well-intentioned adopters. This was an ordinary, dilapidated, and almost bankrupt orphanage, managed by Mrs. Cole, an ordinary elderly woman. However, in a hidden society inaccessible to ordinary people, this orphanage held an extraordinary reputation that was destined to become even more prominent from this day forward. On this day, June 11, 1991, the orphanage welcomed a special guest to knock, knock, knock. The sound of knocking reached Mrs. Cole's ears. She set aside her knitting in the rocking chair and hurriedly made her way to the door. On such a rainy day, who would visit such an old orphanage, she wondered, grabbing a black old umbrella from the rack by the door and opening it as she approached. Standing at the door was an old man, tall and thin, with silver hair and a silver beard that reached his waist. Over his robe, he wore a purple cloak and held a dirty black umbrella. His robe was soaked, and droplets covered his half-moon-shaped glasses. Mrs. Cole, 60 years old, felt that this man was much older than her. Strangely, though, despite looking old enough to be her father, he seemed more energetic, his bright blue eyes full of life. "Oh, come on in." Mrs. Cole fumbled with a large key from her keychain, struggling to open the somewhat rusted gate of the orphanage. The weather has been terrible lately, and the children's clothes have been left out for 2 days without drying. That's true, the old man agreed, following Mrs. Cole through the orphanage's main entrance. He looked around, a hint of nostalgia in his eyes. "Nothing has changed here. It's still so neat," he sighed. "Of course." Mrs. Cole proudly handed a clean towel to the wet old man, saying, "We've always been like this. While we may not provide affluent living conditions, we do our best to give the children a good living environment, just as Mrs. Cole did. Unfortunately, not many people come to help us, and not many come to help these poor little ones." As she spoke, the somewhat grumbling old woman couldn't help but complain. "Have you been here before? I don't seem to remember you," she asked curiously. "Oh, that was many years ago," the old man recalled. "Around 57 or 58 years ago. I can't quite remember. Mrs. Cole received me back then and provided me with significant help." "Then you must be over 80 years old?" Mrs. Cole asked casually while preparing tea for the guest. "Believe me, I'm older than you imagine." The old man finally dried his beard and hair with the towel, then engaged in conversation with the somewhat lonely old woman. After a while, the satisfied chatterbox of an old woman remembered the main reason for their meeting. "So, oh, how rude of me. I forgot to ask for your name." "I am Albus Dumbledore," the old man answered. "I am the headmaster of a wizarding school, and I am here to find a boy named Alaric." "Oh, Alaric." When mentioning this name, the murky eyes of the old woman seemed to light up. "Little Alaric is our pride and joy. There hasn't been a child as intelligent and sensible as him. I've watched him grow up. I've seen all sorts of mischievous and troublesome poor children. You know, it's my profession, but I've never seen such a smart and sensible little boy." Mrs. Cole's face revealed immense pride and joy, and she couldn't help but complain a little. Little Alaric could speak at the age of 1. Since then, he has never cried or made a fuss, whether hungry or bullied by older children. He always faces difficulties on his own. Oh, he's such a resilient child. Mrs. Cole refilled Dumbledore's tea and continued, "This child loves reading. He started reading when he learned to recognize words. Newspapers, magazines, dictionaries, novels. He reads everything. His mind is sharp, and he learns quickly. He could fluently read newspapers at the age of 3. As if introducing her own proud grandson, the old woman spent a long time describing the 10-year-old named Allaric. Dumbledore patiently listened, gradually forming a basic impression of the child: intelligent, sensible, eager to learn, hardworking, kind, and so on. Although he knew there might be some subjective bias from the old woman, the overall impression was still near perfection. Then Dumbledore carefully chose his words, asking Mrs. Cole, "Has anything strange or unusual happened to this child?" "Strange things." Upon hearing this term, the smile on the old lady's face instantly disappeared, and she criticized sharply. "Little Alaric has never experienced anything strange. He is a true good boy, unfortunately encountering such an unfortunate fate. A righteous gentleman would never doubt such a good child." Yes, I didn't doubt him. I just want to have a comprehensive understanding of him." Even Dumbledore, a great wizard and headmaster, couldn't handle the almost angered old lady at this moment. It took him quite a while to convince her that he had no malicious intent. How is that possible, he thought. The acceptance quill clearly wrote his name in the book of admittance, proving that he is not a muggle or squib, indeed possessing magical talent. Such magical talent often causes various accidents before young wizards learn to control magic. But how could Mrs. Cole, as the administrator, not notice anything? Is it because his talent is too low, or Thinking of this, he recalled that person and buried the questions and thoughts deep in his heart. Well then, as the conversation concluded, Dumbledore finally made his request. As the headmaster of Hogwarts School, I would like to admit Alaric as a student in our school. I came here to deliver his acceptance letter and would like to meet him. Oh, another school's acceptance letter. I knew our little Alaric would always be recognized. Mrs. Cole responded cheerfully. But currently, only you, as the headmaster, have come personally. It's up to him to decide. Keep in mind, even Eton College sent him an acceptance letter. Saying this, Mrs. Cole got up from her chair. I'll take you to his room. He should be studying right now. With that, she led Dumbledore up the stairs. In the Wolves' orphanage, Alaric was a legend. When he was only a few months old, Mrs. Cole, who was going out to get the newspaper, found him at the orphanage's door. At that time, he was wrapped in an adult's clothes, and the only thing proving his identity was a plastic card with the words Allaric. From a very young age, Alaric showed his genius. Whether it was learning to speak, walk, or read, he was much faster than his peers, and he was quite sensible, never causing adults any worry. Although Alaric's looks stood out in the orphanage, his maturity and wisdom beyond his age made him easily become the boss of the children there. Whether older or younger, all the children admired him. Since Alaric was 5 years old, the caregivers at Wolves' orphanage felt that their workload had decreased significantly. Under Alaric's management, the children gradually became obedient and responsible. Some older children even willingly helped with household chores. Moreover, in the nearby elementary school, Alaric was a unique genius. In the classroom, no problem could stump him. Teachers and principals praised him, and even after graduating from elementary school, he received an acceptance letter from the prestigious Eton College. But no one knew that this famous genius was actually a reincarnator from another world. In his previous life, Alaric was a student in Eldritch University with a middle-class background. His university was among the top 10 in the country. His major was in the highly popular field of computer. Not only was he considered a winner in life, but he also ranked among the upper echelon of his peers. Apart from that, Alaric was a bit of an otaku, well-versed in various anime and movie genres. Before the transmigration, he took advantage of holiday to watch Avengers Endgame. Due to the circumstances of being a loner, he was struck by lightning on the way back to school, and the unfortunate Alaric disappeared without a trace, becoming a momentary urban legend. It was this accident that led to his transmigration. In reality, he wasn't struck dead by lightning. At that time, Alaric only saw a flash of lightning, and a thunderbolt abruptly passed in front of him, splitting the air open with a black crack. Everything, including air, sand, and himself, was sucked into this crack. Only after that did he realize that this was a space rift, and he fell from this opening into an endless and fantastical space. This chaotic space was filled with strange and dangerous currents everywhere. Occasionally, similar cracks appeared suddenly. These cracks only existed for an instant before disappearing, but there was always something sprayed out from the openings, various living and non-living entities, from planets to dust. Then they were engulfed by the dangerous currents and disappeared without a trace. In Alaric's view, this space should be the superdimensional channel connecting the outer edges of the universe to various universes. The space cracks lead to different universes, appearing due to accidents and then repairing themselves instantly. Only in rare cases would substances from the universe be brought into the superdimensional channel, and the turbulent flow was the time-space turbulence. All substances sucked into it would be destroyed and vanish without a trace. Since coming here, his daily experience was drifting aimlessly in the chaos between the currents, not born and not dead, and he survived by a bizarre stroke of luck. Countless times he was almost sucked into the turbulence, but each time he was unexpectedly pulled out by another turbulent current, continuing to drift under the balance of the turbulence's suction. As time passed, he felt changes in his body. His age became younger and younger. His height and body size shrank, and his clothes became increasingly oversized. When his body reached a certain size, he felt his cognitive abilities starting to regress. He felt like his age was reversing and his brain was undergoing retrogression. In this case, even if he wasn't ground into powder by the turbulence, he might disappear due to the reversal of his body's age, turning back into a fertilized egg. However, luck once again favored him. Just before becoming an embryo, he happened to enter a crack and successfully traversed it intact, emerging from the other end, arriving in a new world, right at the doorstep of this orphanage. At this point, he had regressed into a baby. Most of his clothes and personal items were lost in the space-time channel, leaving only underwear and a signed white iron card, giving him the name Allaric. As Alaric grew up, he began to realize the changes that his experiences in the space-time channel brought to him. These changes made him feel that even though he didn't acquire a system like the protagonists in novels, he could still be considered a chosen one. He discovered that he had the innate ability to learn and grow infinitely. This ability was somewhat similar to Saitama from One Punch Man, but different in certain aspects. Any ability, talent, or skill he possessed could infinitely strengthen through continuous learning and training. As long as he trained, his body would become stronger. As long as he learned, he could master new knowledge. By tempering his will, it became more resilient. With diligent thought, intelligence became more developed. This was akin to the absence of limiters in all aspects. Even the talent that determined the speed of progress would gradually strengthen with practice. This made him immersed in learning and training for a long time until he noticed that he was too different from others. He then slowed down his learning. 8. He also found that he had marvelous talents for time and space. He could perceive distances without any reference point and judge the passage of time without a clock. These were undoubtedly benefits from his experiences in the space-time channel. In addition, as he aged, he began to notice that he could unconsciously influence and change matter. He could move cups with his mind, make soup spoons disappear, sense time slowing down when concentrating, and occasionally summon items from other worlds. With a mature inner self and self-control, he gradually eliminated accidents caused by unconscious emotional excitement and, through continuous experimentation, learned to consciously use some magic abilities. Now he could move lightweight objects with his thoughts and instinctively use some abilities related to time and space. For example, he could briefly control the flow of time in his body, like Emiya Kiritsugu's innate time control, or the bullet time in The Matrix. He could also use summoning spells. They mostly failed, but occasionally he could summon items from other worlds. Until today, his treasure chest was filled with various strange items from other worlds, including a headband resembling the Leaf Village from Naruto, a katana that looked like something from Bleach, a master ball, a book titled The Lusty Argonian Maid, all in Nord language but with illustrations, and H-manga by author Kashiwagi Eri. A coin engraved with "I hope my sisters can grow up with me and get married together," the coin that Sylvanas Windrunner threw into the Dalaran fountain, and a ring named Doran's Lost Ring, and so on. Most of what he summoned were non-living objects, with the only exception being a small white cat named Hamari, currently lying on the windowsill sunbathing, a cat demon from Omamori Hamari. When he first summoned her, she was still a baby, and Alaric personally fed her. Now Himari was 2 years old, perhaps due to being a cat demon. She had become quite intelligent and spiritual. Alaric looked forward to the day when Himari could truly speak and transform into a human. Until today, Alaric felt like he had returned to 1980s or 1990s England. He believed that with knowledge and experiences surpassing the era by 2 or 3 decades, along with his powerful gift, even without a system, he was confident that he could become the world's richest man in the new era of the internet, reaching the pinnacle of life. Until he opened the door and saw the white-bearded old man in front of him. "Hello, Alaric. I am Albus Dumbledore, the headmaster of Hogwarts." Dumbledore.
Meow?
Where am I? Who am I? What am I doing? Didn't he get reborn 39 years ago with a cheat and future knowledge? He was planning to use all these things to get rich, marry a beautiful woman, and reach the pinnacle of life. Now, why the hell was Dumbledore showing up out of nowhere? Sigh. I should have known. Isn't this the Wolves Orphanage, the place where Voldemort spent his childhood? No wonder the name seems familiar. In this instant, countless thoughts crossed Alaric's mind, but in the end, he buried all the doubts in his heart, not revealing any emotions on the surface. "Hello, Mr. Dumbledore and Mrs. Cole." He stepped aside and gestured. "Please come in and have a seat." "Oh, no need, Alaric." Mrs. Cole smiled and waved her hand. "Mr. Dumbledore wants to have a private chat with you, so I won't disturb you two." With that, she closed the door. Soon, the sound of creaking stairs descending echoed from outside. "Well then, hello, child." Dumbledore looked at Alaric kindly, introducing himself. "I am the headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." "Hello, Mr. Dumbledore." Alaric calmly greeted, but there was a hint of excitement in his eyes. This excitement was not because of meeting Dumbledore, but due to the thrill of transmigrating into a different world. However, it created a misunderstanding for Dumbledore. "It seems you're not surprised by the term magic. It looks like you've already realized your uniqueness." Dumbledore raised an eyebrow playfully, snapped his fingers, and Alaric's teacup on the desk automatically filled with tea. "Oh, cool." Seeing this scene, Alaric felt a bit envious. However, he also showed off to Dumbledore. The spoon in the tea tray trembled and flew into the cup with a clink. This surprised Dumbledore. He had never seen a young child possess such powerful magic before mastering it. Typically, wizards at a young age had insufficient magical capacity and lacked control over their magic. Even ordinary wizards found it difficult to perform magic without the help of a wand. Although this trick's application of magic was a bit rough, it was relative to adult wizards. It already proved that Alaric was a genuine magical genius. "I thought about it when I discovered this superpower," Alaric pretended to explain. "I feel that I'm not the only one with magic or superpowers, but people around me think that magic or superpowers don't exist. I believe there's an organization covering it all up. Perhaps they are like me, and maybe they will come looking for me." "You're quite a clever child. So would you like to join Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry and learn more about magic with your peers?" Dumbledore asked kindly. "Of course, Mr. Dumbledore. I look forward to my future life in the school." Alaric smiled, revealing a childlike eagerness. Despite being a teenager in his previous life, he was now a young boy and was very excited about being in this childhood fantasy world, especially learning about magic, a book, and previously unexplored knowledge. What was the internet? Who cared about the world's richest person? Who cared about beautiful women? None of that mattered now. What wealth could compare to the power of magic? What beauty could surpass Hermione, the know-it-all girl, and the charming Fleur Delacour, all these leading and supporting female characters? At last, who could forget Cho Chang, the most underrated girl in the book? Although the magical world had Death Eaters and Voldemort causing trouble, the overall danger level was not that high, especially since the power of the Light Wizards always stood at its peak. The final crisis only arose because Dumbledore himself set up a plan to permanently defeat Voldemort. Moreover, opportunities and dangers coexisted. Alaric's gift was not like a typical system with clear guidance and a planned path. To further develop his abilities, especially time and space abilities, learning magic seemed like the best idea for now. He also hoped to explore various worlds and experience diverse lives in the future. Next, Alaric and Dumbledore chatted for a while. Although he had some knowledge from books and movies, Alaric, like a curious child, asked many questions about the magical world. Dumbledore patiently answered each one. Finally, Dumbledore stood up and said, "It's getting late now. We should head to Diagon Alley. There, we can purchase the necessary items for your enrollment in Hogwarts. Do you have enough pounds?" "Of course, Mr. Dumbledore." Alaric took out his wallet from the drawer, pulled out a stack of pounds, and said, "In fact, I've been submitting articles to children's magazines and earned a decent sum in royalties. I think it should be enough." "That's good." Dumbledore nodded in satisfaction. "Let's get going then." "Himari, let's go." Before leaving, Alaric opened his backpack for Himari on the windowsill. The little white cat leaped in skillfully, showing only its head. After bidding farewell to Mrs. Cole and the curious onlookers, the two left Wool's orphanage and, led by Dumbledore, entered a deserted alley. "How do we get to Diagon Alley?" Alaric was curious. "Apparition, it's a convenient spell but makes people uncomfortable." Dumbledore took out his wand. "Hold on to me, child, and be careful not to vomit." Alaric felt a blur before his eyes, and then everything started spinning. However, in the chaos, he saw clear spatial patterns, a narrow space channel barely accommodating two people. He felt like being sucked into a narrow rubber tube and then expelled again. The space he originally occupied exchanged places with another. In the blink of an eye, they appeared in an alley. Perhaps due to his innate talent, Alaric didn't feel anything special. Meow? But the cat Himari in his backpack meowed, obviously feeling a little uncomfortable. "How do you feel?" Dumbledore looked at Alaric with concern. Wizards experiencing apparition for the first time usually have some adverse reactions. "I feel great," Alaric reassured as he gently patted the cat's head, finally calming her down. "I feel like I can do it a few more times." "Oh, you're truly born to be a wizard. Wool's orphanage always produces some geniuses," Dumbledore exclaimed. Of course, the next sentence was just a mutter to himself and not meant for others to hear. The two walked forward in a narrow alley and finally stopped in front of an inconspicuous little pub. "The Leaky Cauldron," Dumbledore introduced. "This is a well-known place. The Leaky Cauldron is enchanted to ensure that ordinary muggles won't notice it when there's no one leading them." It was a small and dirty pub that people passing by didn't even glance at. Their eyes slid from the large bookstore on one side of the street to the record store on the other, as if they couldn't see it at all. Although it was a famous place in the wizarding world, the inside was dim and dilapidated. 9 elderly women sat in the corner, drinking small glasses of sherry, one of them smoking a long pipe. A young man with a tall hat was chatting with the old bartender. The bartender's head was bald as if it were a swollen walnut. When the two entered, the buzzing chatter immediately stopped, and everyone nodded and smiled politely at Dumbledore, who politely reciprocated each greeting. The barkeeper picked up a glass and said, "Professor Dumbledore, are you personally picking up the new student?" "Yes, a new student from the Muggle orphanage," Dumbledore replied. "Is young Harry doing well? He'll be going to Hogwarts this year, too." Tom spoke as if bringing up something delightful, and others nearby perked up to listen. "Hagrid will be in charge of escorting Harry," Dumbledore explained, then led Alaric into the courtyard, where there was only a wall made of stacked bricks. "The entrance to Diagon Alley is here. You must remember the way to enter Diagon Alley," Dumbledore reminded, lightly tapping 3 times on a special spot on the brick wall with his wand, saying, "All right, stand back, Alaric." The brick that was touched by the wand shook and began to move. A small hole appeared in the middle, and the opening grew larger. In no time, they were faced with a wide archway, wide enough for both to pass through, leading to a winding, cobbled street with no end in sight. Turning around, Dumbledore opened his arms and said to Alaric, "Welcome to Diagon Alley." Following Dumbledore, Alaric stepped into the magical world for the first time. He understood that his life would bid farewell to ordinary. The fame and fortune of ordinary people would no longer be his pursuit. His future would be accompanied by legends. Everything would begin in this little alley. The alley was filled with various strange shops, street vendors standing on the side, and people buying things. Most of them recognized Dumbledore and nodded in greeting. The old man led Alaric through the alley, nodding to others while introducing each shop and what Alaric could buy in them. Finally, they arrived in front of a snowy white building, much taller than the surrounding small shops.
This is Gringotts, Dumbledore introduced. Gringotts is the Wizarding World's bank. Here, you need to exchange Muggle currency for wizarding galleons, sickles, and knuts.
Next to the shiny bronze door of Gringotts stood a goblin wearing a deep red and gold uniform. They were about a head shorter than Alaric, with a dark and clever face, sharp beard, and long fingers and feet. As they entered, the goblin bowed and greeted them. Then, a second door appeared in front of them, silver, with the following inscription: "Enter, stranger, but take heed of what awaits the sin of greed, for those who take, but do not earn, must pay most dearly in their turn. So if you seek beneath our floors a treasure that was never yours. Thief, you have been warned, beware of finding more than treasure there." 2 goblins bowed to them, guiding them into a grand marble hall. About 100 goblins sat on high stools behind a row of long counters. Some were weighing coins on copper scales, others inspecting gemstones with magnifying glasses, while hastily recording transactions in large ledgers. Alaric approached a counter and took out a stack of British pounds, saying, "Hello, I need to exchange pounds for galleons." An elderly goblin approached, taking the pounds. "The exchange rate is 5 to 1 for pounds to galleons. Are you sure you want to exchange all 200 pounds into galleons?" "Yes," Alaric nodded, "and also exchange 1 galleon into sickles." 1 galleon equals 17 sickles, the old goblin explained. After a while, a younger goblin handed Alaric a heavy bag. Next, Dumbledore took Alaric shopping. "Firstly, you need a wand," he said, "and Ollivanders makes the best wands." The shop was small and shabby, with a faded gold sign on the door that read, "Ollivanders, makers of fine wands since 382 BC. In the dusty showcase, a single wand lay on a faded purple cushion. "Hello. How are you, Ollivander, my old friend?" Dumbledore greeted enthusiastically as soon as they entered. A shriveled old man emerged from a corner, warmly embracing Dumbledore. "Hello, old friend," he said in a gentle tone of archaic English. "How come you have the time to visit me?" "Oh, just picking up a student from the Muggle world, Wool's orphanage, you know." Dumbledore winked and then introduced. "This is him, Alaric. Although born to Muggles, he can already proficiently control his magic." "Ah, I see." Ollivander approached, staring sharply at Alaric, and pulled out a long tape measure with silver markings from his pocket. "Well, Alaric, let me have a look. Which arm do you use for your wand?" "I use my right hand," Alaric replied. "Raise your arm good." Ollivander began measuring from shoulder to fingertip. "Every Ollivander wand contains a core of powerful magical substance, the essence of its being, Alaric. We use unicorn hair, phoenix feather, and dragon heartstring. Each Ollivander wand is unique because no 2 unicorns, dragons, or phoenixes are exactly alike. Of course, if you use a wand that belongs to another wizard, the effect won't be as good." Ollivander rambled on while moving between shelves, climbing up and down ladders, and letting the tape measure automatically measure Alaric. Although his constant prattling made Alaric somewhat drowsy, he still listened attentively. Despite having some understanding from the original work, he was still curious about everything in the magical world. "All right," Ollivander said, the tape measure falling to the ground and rolling into a ball. "Alaric, try this one, made of chestnut and phoenix feather core, 12.5 inches long. Give it a wave." Alaric took the wand, but as soon as he waved it, he sensed trouble. Indeed, the next moment, the tip of the wand emitted a golden red flame, quickly igniting the nearby cabinet in front of him. Alaric almost felt like he was about to summon a live phoenix. "Aguamenti." Dumbledore quickly waved his wand, and a gushing stream of water immediately extinguished the flames. "It seems this wand isn't suitable for you." Ollivander shook his head, then took out another one. "Made of hornbeam and serpent heartstring, 9 inches long. Give it a try." This time, an unexpected event was a cloud of black smoke. The shrouded cabinet and boxes quickly corroded with unsightly holes, taking considerable effort to restore. Next, Ollivander had Alaric test one wand after another. It seemed that the more trials there were, the happier he became. However, accidents occurred again and again. Ollivander and Dumbledore became cautious, ready with wands in hand to prevent sudden flames, frost, or explosions from causing irreversible consequences. Thanks to the dirty windows of Ollivander's small shop, the pedestrians outside didn't notice any of this. Finally, before the wand box submerged Allaric, Ollivander stopped this unproductive experiment. "Oh, what a picky customer indeed," he sighed. "Is that orphanage under some spell? This child's magic is even stronger than that guy." "Mr. Ollivander, what are you talking about? I don't understand," Alaric said, knowing that guy referred to Voldemort, but at this moment, he still pretended to be ignorant. But Ollivander dryly changed the subject. "No, nothing. You'll know it later. Let's get back to the topic of wands." This is the wand I think is most suitable for you, he stumbled, pulling out a delicate purple wand from a large box and handing it to Alaric. Guys, after looking at voting in previous chapter, I have decided to go with name Alaric. Ollivander began introducing this wand. The materials include a tail feather from a particularly ancient phoenix bird and the core of a 100-year-old elder tree. It is 12 inches long, flexible, and elastic. It's one of my proudest works in my lifetime, and I can't find such precious materials again. I can't make a more powerful wand than this. I just hope this wand won't have any more accidents. Alaric, exhausted by the frequent surprises, had no energy to consider whether the wand was powerful. He just wanted to end these experiments quickly. However, he still cautiously took the wand. At the moment he took the wand, all the wands in the small shop trembled. A strange sensation transferred from the wand to his hand. A smooth and submissive feeling, as if he could effortlessly perform magic. Alaric waved the wand gently, and this time, there were no surprises. The tip of the wand sparkled with a brilliant silver light, and then all the wand tremors ceased. Excellent, truly excellent, Ollivander exclaimed loudly. To witness my life's greatest work, find its true owner in my lifetime is truly an honor. He then turned to Alaric and reminded, a wand with a phoenix feather core is powerful and extremely picky about their owners, especially when it comes from a phoenix king. An elder wand is even more challenging to control and demands the highest talent from the user. Wizards who can use an elder wand are truly destined for greatness. As the owner of such a wand, you are destined to have a great future. When he said the last sentence, he looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore smiled slightly. Child, I'm glad you have this wand. I'm starting to look forward to your performance at Hogwarts. Alaric put away the wand satisfactorily and asked, so how much for this wand? No need for money. Ollivander looked at the wand reluctantly and refused. To see my life's greatest work meet its true owner, I am already very satisfied. I hope you can use it well. Watching Dumbledore and Alaric leave, Ollivander muttered to himself, another one from Wool's orphanage, and such a genius again. No, even more incredible than that person. I hope he won't follow in that person's footsteps. Otherwise, the magical world will... Next, we need to get you a set of Hogwarts uniforms. After leaving the wand shop, Dumbledore said, Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions, we usually go there. Madame Malkin was a short and chubby witch with a friendly smile, dressed in purple. Are you buying Hogwarts school uniforms, dear? Before Alaric could speak, she said, Oh, hello, Professor Dumbledore. Are you here to personally pick up a student? Sorry, I didn't notice you just until now. The two greeted each other with smiles. Alaric noticed another young man coming out from the back, slightly shorter than him, thanks to his continuously growing body. He was taller than most peers. He was wearing a dull and old-fashioned black robe, which Alaric found extremely ugly. Excuse me, is that the Hogwarts uniform? He pointed helplessly at the young man. Oh, yes, dear. Madame Malkin led Eric to a high stool. But if you're not satisfied, you can ask for some lace or something. Oh, and can you stand on this stool? I need to measure your size. Alaric was still dissatisfied with this old-fashioned robe. He made an unexpected request. Can I design my own robe and then customize it here?
Design your own robe. Madame Malkin's voice immediately rose 8 degrees. No one has ever made such a request here. We are professionals, but if you insist, it's not impossible.
The last sentence was much quieter, apparently. Alaric's request hurt her feelings, and she felt her professionalism was being underestimated. So Alaric skillfully drew a sketch on paper. It was the uniform of the Mages Association students from the Type Moon world, slightly shorter than the Hogwarts robe, more stylish in design, and seemed to be a product of combining Muggle world design styles. In addition, he drew matching shirts, vests, trousers, and so on. Dumbledore and Madame Malkin stood behind Alaric, curious to see what he could draw. As Alaric's skillful strokes gradually shaped the clothing, the two began to take a serious look. I must say, your new student is indeed a genius, Madame Malkin exclaimed to Dumbledore. This is not something an ordinary child can design. If he becomes a fashion designer, he should be able to make a lot of money, a big profit in galleons. Dumbledore nodded empathetically. Since meeting Alaric today, the surprises he brought had not stopped. Finally, after finishing the drawing, Alaric stopped, and Madame Malkin immediately took the drawing and carefully examined it. You're amazing, my dear. I've never seen such a beautiful design. After carefully examining each sketch, Madame Malkin exclaimed, Oh, these are all Muggle style. Alaric modestly shook his head. So, can I order such a set of uniforms? Of course. I can't wait to see what the finished product looks like. Madame Malkin looked a bit excited. Then she hesitated and asked Alaric, if you allow me to make uniforms of the same style for others, then during your 7 years at Hogwarts, I will custom make a well-fitting set of uniforms for you every year with the best materials. What do you think? Madame Malkin looked at Alaric expectantly, and Alaric thought it wasn't a bad deal for him, so he readily agreed. After that, they went to Flourish and Blott's bookstore to buy textbooks. Alaric not only bought a complete set of first-year textbooks, but also purchased all the textbooks for Charms and Transfiguration up to 7th grade. In addition, the curious Alaric also bought a book titled Introduction to Ancient Magic and Rune Scripts and Hogwarts: A History. Although you are still young, I am glad there is someone interested in ancient magical scripts, Dumbledore commented when he saw Alaric's choices. Last semester, only 2 students chose to study ancient magic and runes, which is too few. I'm sure Professor Babbling will like you. He added later, however, ancient runic scripts of magic are a bit challenging, so I hope you are mentally prepared. I just want to study how magic came to be. Alaric picked up Introduction to Ancient Magical Scripts and flipped to the title page. This book says that modern spells are simplified versions of ancient magical and runic scripts, and the creation of magical items is also related to ancient magical scripts. I think by studying these scripts, I can find out where the power of magic comes from. I must say, you will definitely end up in Ravenclaw in the future. Dumbledore looked at him with a pleased expression. After inquiring about the significance of each house, Alaric commented, "A wizard's power comes from knowledge, so wizards who pursue knowledge can be considered true wizards. In this regard, Ravenclaw is indeed more in line with my preferences." After paying, Alaric was faced with a pile of thick books. It was impossible for his small backpack to hold so many books. Helpless, Alaric could only look at Dumbledore with pleading eyes. "You can use the shrinking charm to shrink these books and then put them in your backpack." Dumbledore took out his wand and lightly tapped the book pile. Reducio. These books immediately shrank several times until each book was the size of a fingernail. Himari, who saw this scene, curiously approached and stared at these miniature books. "If you want them to return to their original size, the spell is Engorgio," Dumbledore added. Alaric, interested, took out his new wand and imitated Dumbledore's posture. He pointed at the tiny books and said the spell, Engorgio. The fingernail-sized books expanded until they returned to their original size. Himari, caught off guard, was hit on the nose by one of the enlarged books, and she retreated into the backpack with a startled meow. Alaric comforted her by patting her head. "Be careful, little one." Then he tried to cast another spell on the books. Reducio. Immediately, the books shrank back to the size of a fingernail. Dumbledore, watching on the side, was amazed. Alaric had only seen him cast the shrinking charm once, but he could immediately learn it and successfully cast it perfectly the first time. Moreover, he could generalize from it and successfully cast the engorgement charm. Such talent and learning ability were unprecedented. "Although you have heard it several times today, I still have to say, you are indeed a genius," he praised. Alaric put all the shrunken books into his backpack, and after reminding Himari not to play with the books, he followed Dumbledore to purchase other items. In the cauldron store, Alaric bought a large cauldron made of tin, which could be folded and automatically stirred. He also bought a set of glass and crystal potion bottles, a telescope, and a measuring scale. In the magical pet store, he refused to buy an owl and decided to find a way to summon a magical creature for delivering letters. However, he did buy some expensive cat food for Himari. He believed that wizard cat food might be more suitable for a cat demon than muggle cat food, hoping that this would help Himari grow faster, at least awakening her demon powers sooner. This series of expenses left his money pouch, originally plump, completely empty. This made him determined to use his advantage as a reincarnator and the power of magic to make a big profit in the muggle world during the next summer vacation. Not being able to buy the best cauldron and experimental equipment made him feel ashamed about his identity as a reincarnator. In Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor, Dumbledore treated Alaric to an ice cream, while he himself bought a cockroach cluster, which made Alaric feel nauseous. Finally, using the apparition, Dumbledore sent Alaric back near the orphanage. Before leaving, Dumbledore said to him, "Alaric, you are a true genius and a kind-hearted good child. I hope you use the power of magic wisely. Remember, what defines a person is not their power, but how they decide to use that power." After saying that, he playfully winked and disappeared in front of Alaric. After returning from Diagon Alley, Alaric locked himself in his room and began to study the magic of this world. Through experiments and research, he roughly understood the principles of magic in this world. It was a kind of spell that used magic to influence the rules. The generation of magic comes from living beings themselves, so only wizards and magical creatures with magic can cast spells. Using magic in this world requires strong will, proper pronunciation, and gestures. The strong will determines the target and effect of the magic, while pronunciation and gestures are essential catalysts. Through these, magic can directly achieve results by influencing the rules. Compared to directly using magic to forcefully impact the reality of the world, magic in this world is like completing tasks directly through a console in an RPG game. It is not only more effective, but also allows for spells like the Disillusionment Charm, the Levitation Charm, and others that completely violate the basic rules of energy conservation and entropy increase. As for wands, it is well known that magical creatures in this world possess stronger magic than wizards. Wands are made from materials on these magical creatures and some special woods, serving as organizers and converters of magic. When a wizard becomes familiar enough with a spell and is proficient in casting it, they can omit the incantation and wand movements, casting spells silently with their bare hands, a wandless magic. This is known as nonverbal and wandless casting, making the casting process faster and less predictable. However, due to the lower catalytic effect of silent casting and the lower efficiency of handling and converting magic without a wand, the spell's effect is much weaker and less efficient. With Alaric's talent, he quickly learned relatively simple and commonly used magic, such as the wand lighting charm, levitation charm, and disillusionment charm, but he couldn't learn more complex spells in his room. On the one hand, knowledge like spellcasting and potion making requires suitable facilities and materials, and on the other hand, more complex spells are not only prone to irreparable accidents, but may also attract the attention of Mrs. Cole and his other friends in the orphanage. Unable to quell his curiosity about magic, Alaric could only endure it and look forward to the day when school started. The wait was always long, but finally the time came for September 1st. Alaric arrived at King's Cross Station at 9 o'clock, hoping to enter the train early and have the freedom to choose a compartment without having to stay with people he wasn't interested in. Except for the main characters, only George and Fred Weasley, Cedric Diggory, and attractive girls could catch his attention at Hogwarts. At this time, the crowd at the train station was not small. There were quite a lot of people coming and going at the train station. Standing between platforms 9 and 10, Alaric carefully looked around, hoping to find an opportunity to enter platform 9 to 8 Seer without anyone noticing. Soon, several wizards in strange robes walked in front of him, foolishly bumping into the wall with a silly expression on their faces, and then one by one, they disappeared. Alaric gritted his teeth, suppressing the desire to complain about their lack of manners, and followed these people into the wall leading to platform 98 Slytherin. In the blink of an eye, he felt like he had passed through a door, and then the scenery changed dramatically. In front of him was an old-fashioned red steam locomotive with a sign reading Hogwarts Express. With Alaric's talent, he could clearly feel that he was in a special space, a space that coincided with the original location of King's Cross Station. "It's really unscientific, reaching such a level with magic," he exclaimed, following the crowd onto the train. At this time, there were not many people in the train compartments, but Allaric still sat in a slightly later compartment with an empty space. He noticed that the older wizards tended to sit towards the front, while the new students were concentrated in the last few compartments. After putting away his luggage, Alaric opened his backpack, released Himari, who had been confined inside for a long time, and then took out a book, Hogwarts, A School History, to start reading. Perhaps same-age young wizards would be bored with this kind of reading material, but for him, it was a decent pastime. Himari meowed, rubbing against Alaric's legs, showing signs of wanting to play with her master. However, Allaric was enjoying himself at the moment. He casually took out a fragrant grilled fish jerky from his bag, gave it to Himari, and then casually petted her head. That should be enough to pass the time for her. Himari had no choice but to hold the dried fish in her mouth and walk out of the compartment to roam around. Alaric was quite at ease about this. After all, Himari was a cat demon, although still young, her intelligence was enough to take care of herself. After a while, she ran back to the compartment in a hurry and pounced into Alaric's arms, as if someone was chasing her. No, someone was indeed chasing her. It was a girl who looked about the same age as Alaric, with thick brown hair and a pair of large front teeth. She was already wearing the Hogwarts uniform, and Allaric immediately recognized her because she looked very similar to Emma Watson. Hermione Granger, the female protagonist of the Harry Potter series, the clever know-it-all girl who consistently held the top spot in her grade. However, J.K. Rowling arranged for her to end up with Ron, which was quite regrettable. The moment he saw her, Alaric's first thought wasn't about his long-imagined strategy of making friends with main characters. Instead, he wondered how and why the story of this Harry Potter world was written into a novel and then adapted into a movie in his original world. He pondered why the movie's female lead resembled the real Hermione Granger of this world to such a great extent, but wasn't an exact match. He didn't believe that the Harry Potter world was created because of the existence of the Harry Potter series of novels and movies. On the contrary, he was more inclined to believe that the Harry Potter world influenced his world, leading to the creation of these works. Currently, he couldn't prove this point, but he believed that, with his learning and research on magic combined with his innate talent for time and space abilities, he would undoubtedly find a way to travel between these different worlds. He felt that with each journey through different dimensions, he would uncover the truth. Coming back to reality, Alaric began to assess the girl standing in front of him, who was very famous back in his home world. She was an arrogant girl, like a swan with a stretched neck. In terms of appearance, she was still very cute, a beauty in the making. "Is this cat yours?" she asked, without any pleasantries or self-introduction.
Can I touch it?
"Meow," Himari whimpered, retreating into Alaric's backpack, only revealing a pair of bright eyes observing from the shadows. "Of course not. You scared Himari." Alaric raised an eyebrow, unable to fathom what the girl had done to frighten Himari to this extent. "Himari, why did you give your cat such a name? Is it a magical language? Hermione asked curiously, seemingly completely diverted. No, it's Japanese, meaning Himari, Alaric explained. Oh, you're Japanese? Hermione nodded as if understanding. Not really. Then, why did you give your cat a Japanese name? Because I like it. Hermione's consecutive questions left Alaric somewhat bemused. He hadn't expected her curiosity to reach such levels. Fortunately, the girl stopped and shifted to another topic. I'm Hermione Granger, she introduced herself. I come from a Muggle family, and no one in my family understands magic. So when I received the acceptance letter, I was extremely surprised, but also very happy because, from what I know, this is the most excellent wizarding school. But still, I've memorized all the textbooks so I can catch up with all of you. So what's your name? She spoke very fast, finishing a long paragraph of self-introduction in one breath, like a rapid-firing machine gun. She also took the opportunity to show off her learning abilities. What a girl! Alaric sighed inwardly and then introduced himself. I'm Alaric. I come from a Muggle orphanage, so I'm not sure if I have wizarding blood. Oh, and by the way, do you want to sit here? Alaric invited. This invitation was not only out of curiosity, but also because he wanted to test whether the so-called plot could be changed, and this experiment started with Hermione. He planned to influence Hermione to join Ravenclaw instead of Gryffindor. This would undoubtedly have a massive impact on the plot, and the future might change drastically. Additionally, he genuinely believed that Hermione's intelligence and eagerness to learn were more suitable for Ravenclaw. Hoping that close proximity with one of the main leads would influence some of the choices was also one of his hidden intentions. Hearing that Alaric came from a Muggle world, Hermione immediately felt that their relationship had become much closer. She gladly accepted the invitation, sitting opposite Alaric, and they started talking about the magical world that had suddenly appeared in their lives, changing it completely. Obviously, having read through the original Harry Potter books, Alaric's insights and knowledge about this world far surpassed Hermione's. Moreover, with his extraordinary learning abilities, the young girl soon realized that maintaining her pride in this aspect was not easy. I have met my match, my rival. Hermione thought to herself, but at the same time, she acknowledged that Allaric was indeed an outstanding peer who excelled in studies and had great academic achievements. At this moment, there was another knock on the compartment door. Alaric opened the door, and outside stood two girls a bit older than Hermione. One had freckles with brown hair, and the other was a black-haired Asian girl. The latter seemed to be dragged along reluctantly, both holding luggage in their hands. Hello, my name is Marietta. The brown-haired girl introduced herself. This is my good friend Cho Chang. We both saw you outside, and noticed you were new here. Also, there was still some free space in your compartment, so we thought we'd come and get acquainted. Hello, the black-haired girl nodded towards Alaric. Alaric introduced himself to Marietta and Hermione, then turned to Cho Chang and said, Hello, Cho Chang, I'm Alaric. Seeing him, Cho Chang opened her mouth in surprise. Hello, I didn't think you were new here, just because how calm you were while boarding the train. Ah, it wasn't too challenging. We simply went in the direction everyone else was heading, Alaric said with a smile. The talk between Alaric and the two girls was going smoothly, and they were standing very close to each other, not paying attention to anyone around them. This made Hermione quite uncomfortable, and she felt that she was being ignored. What on earth are you all discussing about standing so closely? Hermione protested. Can't you see I am also here? Calm down, Hermione. Alaric shrugged and turned to Marietta. So, would you like to come in? There's still space here. Of course, Marietta readily nodded and pulled the hesitating Cho Chang into the compartment. With the addition of the two girls, everyone became a bit reserved. No one spoke, and the atmosphere became awkward. Ultimately, Marietta broke the ice. She glanced at Alaric and then at everyone, and somewhat reluctantly asked, Alaric, you look beautiful. Hey, thanks, but how can you call a man beautiful? You should instead use handsome, Alaric complained. However, the truth was, as handsome as he was, he could indeed still be called beautiful. Mrs. Cole had more than once expressed that if Alaric were to cross-dress, he would be cuter than any girl. A round-faced chubby boy knocked on the compartment door. Sorry, he said tearfully, I wanted to ask, have you seen my toad? All four shook their heads, and he immediately burst into tears. I've lost it again. It always tries to run away from me. It's okay. We'll help you find it together, Hermione volunteered. Then she suddenly remembered something and turned to ask, You all will help too, right? Of course, this fits Hermione's character. Thinking this, Alaric reluctantly stood up and replied, Fine, I'll help look too. Cho Chang and Marietta looked at each other, initially ready to mind their own business, but seeing the new friends they just made, they sighed and reluctantly joined the search. Seeing this scene, the round-faced boy was moved to tears. Thank you all. I'm Neville Longbottom. Thank you for helping me find Trevor. Alaric comfortingly patted his head. It's okay. We're all classmates, and classmates should help each other. Besides, he paused, a bit proud. Finding things should be left to the professionals. Under the puzzled looks of the others, he shouted, Himari! With a meow, a cute little white cat emerged from Alaric's backpack and gracefully leaped into the boy's arms. What a cute kitten. Cho Chang and Marietta, who hadn't noticed Himari before, were instantly captivated. Alaric affectionately patted the cat's head. Himari, we're looking for a toad. Its owner is him, remember? While saying this, he pointed to Neville. Himari approached, sniffed Neville's scent, and then meowed to show understanding. Satisfied, Alaric nodded and put Himari on the ground. Let's go then, he ordered. With his command, Himari elegantly strolled down the train corridor, sniffing the air as she walked. Alaric led Neville and the three girls behind. Can she really understand what you're saying? Hermione asked. Yes, Himari has intelligence similar to humans, so of course she can understand. Alaric replied. Then she must be a magical creature, Marietta concluded. Is she a Kneazle or a cat with Kneazle ancestry? No, Himari is a cat demon, the boy denied. Himari is actually a cat demon from anime Omamori, Himari.
But I thought it was a magical creature.
Yeah, I also don't think this cat is a demon. It may be a magical creature. Hermione eagerly answered. But this cat could indeed be a demon. Cho Chang nodded. My dad told me that any creature, any animal, has the potential to become a demon if given the chance. Terrifying. Why would you raise a demon? If it were me, I would have never kept one. After hearing this, Neville was startled and involuntarily slowed down, walking to the back of the group.
What's so scary about it? Himari is so cute.
Exactly. Himari is not scary at all. Coward. The girls expressed disdain towards Neville. Generally, girls would be more afraid of strange things like this, but Himari's cuteness had captivated them. They all expressed, even if she is a demon, as long as she is cute, there's no problem. Indeed, in this world, beauty is justice. Allaric, somewhat emotional, patted his own face. It seems that my future is absolutely bright. After walking along the corridor for a while, Himari suddenly stopped, then entered a compartment. The five immediately followed. In the compartment, two boys were facing each other. One had black hair and glasses, and the other was a red-haired boy. Their clothes were a bit worn, and their appearances resembled the characters from the movies. Alaric guessed their identities at a glance. Harry Potter, the chosen one, and his sidekick, Ron Weasley, the one who would later marry Hermione. On the table in the compartment were snacks and wrappers. It seemed they were originally enjoying some food, but now the black-haired boy curiously looked at Himari, while the red-haired boy huddled in fear, holding a squeaking mouse in one hand and a shabby wand in the other, randomly pointing it at Himari. There seemed to be a green light coming out of the tip of the wand. Alaric was startled by his actions, recalling that in the original book, Ron often had accidents when casting spells. Expelliarmus! Alaric flicked his wrist, and a purple wand appeared in his hand. A red light shot out from the wand tip and instantly hit the red-haired boy. He let out a miserable cry, and the wand in his hand flew out. With his other hand, Alaric casually reached out and effortlessly caught the flying wand. Cool, the boy with glasses exclaimed in admiration. You actually know magic. What's the name of that spell? Hermione asked excitedly. Cho Chang and Marietta were also impressed by this electrifying scene, applauding him with admiration. Thank you, Alaric nodded at them, then bent down and returned the shabby wand to Ron. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to do this, but next time, please don't point your wand at my Himari. Ron hesitated for a moment, then nodded in understanding, clutching his wand tightly. Himari, after completing her mission, jumped back into Alaric's backpack with a satisfied look on her face. Affected by Alaric's disarming charm, Ron Weasley seemed frightened. Even his speech was stuttering. I understand. He swallowed hard, finally regaining composure. I don't like cats. I thought she came in to eat Scabbers. Himari would never eat such strange things. Alaric shook his head. He knew that Scabbers, the rat, was actually the animagus Peter Pettigrew. However, he didn't intend to expose Peter, as doing so would put himself in a suspicious situation. How does a muggle who just entered the magical world know so much? Himari, in response, also mewed and distanced herself from Ron and his rat, apparently sensing something peculiar about Scabbers. Alaric casually picked up Himari and introduced himself to Harry and Ron. He also introduced the other four. Finally, he explained, we came here to help Neville find his toad. But Neville was sitting in this compartment originally, Harry Potter pointed out, puzzled. Neville behind them nodded in agreement. Now the girls cast skeptical glances at Alaric. Watch, Himari never makes mistakes. Alaric sneered, and Himari cast a disdainful glance at the others, expressing her disdain for their doubts. She leaped from Alaric's shoulder, gracefully landed on a suitcase, and then used her cat's claws to scratch it. This is my luggage, Neville blurted out. Alaric gestured for him to open the bag. Himari means to say that your toad is hiding inside. Trevor can't be in there. I personally organized the suitcase, and I would have known if Trevor were in there, Neville muttered, but reluctantly opened the suitcase under Alaric's insistence. As expected, in line with Alaric's expectations, as soon as the suitcase was opened, a toad, as if finally liberated, jumped out. With the appearance of the toad, the truth was revealed. Neville had wasted a considerable amount of time going through each compartment, asking about Trevor. But in reality, Trevor had been left in his suitcase the entire time. Himari lifted her chin triumphantly, strutting back and forth before the group, looking like a proud rooster. Watching her adorable and proud demeanor, the girls' hearts melted. They spared no praise, thinking about how they could personally touch Himari. However, Himari ran back into her master's arms with an indifferent look, showing no love for the compliments from the girls. With the matter resolved, the two groups, who had just clashed moments ago, began introducing themselves. When the black-haired boy wearing glasses said his name Harry Potter, there was an exclamation of surprise. "Is it really you?" Hermione was excited. "I know everything about you. Of course, I bought a few extra reference books, A History of Modern Magic, The Rise and Fall of Dark Arts, Important Magical Events of the 20th Century, all of which mention you." Hearing this, Harry Potter had a bewildered expression. He never knew he was so famous. But, as a typical figure who fought against the Dark Lord and escaped death, Harry had long become a celebrity in the wizarding world. Cho Chang and Marietta couldn't help but take a closer look at him. Cho Chang had mostly lived in the Muggle world, only entering the wizarding world a year ago, so she had no real feelings about this. But Marietta was different. She even wanted to go forward and ask Harry for an autograph. Compared to them, Alaric was much calmer. He expressed a bit of surprise, then had brief conversations with both Harry and Ron, the latter being somewhat neglected in Harry's shadow. Harry felt that Alaric wasn't just interested in his fame, while Ron was touched that Alaric didn't only pay attention to the renowned Harry Potter, but also acknowledged him. Now, even the conflict a few minutes ago, where Alaric disarmed Ron's wand, was completely forgotten. Following that, Allaric bid farewell to them along with the girls and left. As they left, Ron cast an envious and jealous glance at Alaric's back. "He's just a bit better looking, isn't he?" Ron complained to Harry. "He can sit in the same compartment with 3 girls. Although he's a good guy, I bet anyone who walks with him wouldn't be noticed by any girl." Harry nodded in agreement. Although both of them thought Alaric was a good guy, boys tend to unite in their resentment against handsome guys. The so-called handsome guy, holding Himari, returned to the compartment with the 3 girls in a somewhat helpless manner. On the way, Hermione kept chatting with Marietta about Harry Potter and Voldemort. The two, one having read many books about the magical world and the other with parents working in the Ministry of Magic, were well informed, engaging in gossip topics and occasionally exclaiming in surprise. Cho Chang, on the other hand, listened attentively to their conversation, occasionally chiming in. Only Alaric, who wasn't very interested in gossip, had nothing to say and could only read his own book. Reading alone wasn't boring for Alaric, but soon the girls shifted the topic to him. They discussed the spell he used and how he took out his wand. Hermione, who loved digging into details, was the first to ask him a question. "What spell did you use just now?" she inquired. "You instantly disarmed that redhead's wand." "That was the disarming charm," Alaric casually replied. "It's the most commonly used spell in wizard duels, and the incantation is Expelliarmus." "I know that," Marietta chimed in eagerly. "I remember, this charm was mentioned in Defense Against the Dark Arts class, but the teacher said we would learn it in higher grades. You can actually use such a complicated spell. How did you do it?" Hermione, also a muggle born like Alaric, was visibly affected. She couldn't wait to ask him for tips. Actually, Alaric explained, this spell is not complicated. It's even considered the simplest among the spells used in direct confrontation. Although it doesn't have a powerful offensive effect and can be easily blocked by various counterspells, it has an advantage that surpasses other spells. "What advantage is that?" Hermione asked impatiently. "It's the shortest incantation among dual spells, and it can be cast the fastest. Using this spell often gives the caster the advantage of taking the initiative in magical duels." Upon hearing this explanation, Cho Chang and Marietta nodded in understanding, feeling admiration for Alaric's extensive knowledge. However, Hermione was still dissatisfied. She questioned, "I have never seen such an answer in any book. Expelliarmus having the shortest incantation."
Where did you read that?
"I haven't seen anyone mention the length of incantations in any magical books. This is my own conclusion. I compared several relatively simple dual spells, such as the Stunning Spell, the Impediment Jinx, the Full Body Bind Curse, and the Dancing Feet spell. After that, I arrived at this conclusion." Alaric replied, "But since it's not mentioned in any books, how can you ensure that this is the correct conclusion? Remember, these books were written by the greatest wizards. Even they didn't say this. What makes you think you are right?" Hermione challenged. "Such a proud girl, unwilling to admit defeat at any time. Let me teach you a lesson." Thinking so, Alaric sternly criticized Hermione. "Miss Hermione Granger, I assume you haven't studied Muggle science seriously since being admitted to Hogwarts, have you?" "Well, not really, but what does that have to do with Muggle science?" Hermione blushed a bit and asked back. "It has a lot to do with it. Although Muggle science lacks convenience in magic, it is very worthwhile to study in terms of logic and problem-solving methods. Even in the study of magic, you can add a thing or two, it can be used as a reference. For example, When researching the duration of incantations, I only need to maintain my magical power and energy in an equally abundant state. Using the same volume, the same speed, and clear pronunciation, I cast different spells and record the time taken for each. This way, I can roughly compare the lengths of the incantations. This is the controlled variable method used in science, Alaric explained seriously. Finally, he concluded, the spirit of science tells us that practice is the only way to find the truth. Blindly believing in authority is not advisable. Even the theories of the great scientists like Newton have been proven not to be absolute truths in modern times, and they have limitations in many aspects. So why do you think that the wizards who wrote these textbooks are absolutely correct? After all, magic is not as rigorous as science in terms of precision. If these predecessors' words are completely correct, how are new spells created? After all, their books did not mention these spells. Following your reasoning, the entire wizarding world would never progress. This explanation left Marietta, who came from a wizarding family, confused indeed. Many wizards lacked logical reasoning abilities, but Hermione Granger, who came from a Muggle family and had long been in the Muggle world, barely understood what Alaric was saying. This kind of thinking, I've never heard of it before. Cho Chang looked admiringly at her fellow Muggle-born. Using scientific methods to study magic, you're really a genius. Hermione, on the other hand, felt a bit teary-eyed from Alaric's words. She had always considered herself intelligent and was unwilling to admit defeat to Alaric. However, Alaric's theory was reasonable, leaving her unable to refute. She found herself in an embarrassing situation. She wanted to argue, but couldn't, and she wanted to apologize, but felt embarrassed. In the end, she chose to apologize. Sorry, she whispered. I admit I was wrong. But before she finished speaking, she ran out crying. Hearing Marietta's comment, both Hermione and Cho Chang earnestly scrutinized Alaric, then blushed and looked away simultaneously. The atmosphere became even more awkward. Helplessly, Alaric recalled his original purpose, getting Hermione into Ravenclaw, so he deliberately asked, are you two also first-year students? No, we entered Hogwarts last year, and now we are already in our second year. Cho Chang shook her head. I am your senior in this school, so you should call me with respect, Marietta added. 11. All right, senior. Alaric rolled his eyes. So, which house are you in? We're both in Ravenclaw, the two girls said in unison. Ah, Ravenclaw. Alaric pretended to nod thoughtfully. I hope I'll also be sorted into Ravenclaw this year. How about you, Hermione? Gryffindor, Hermione replied. I heard they say Gryffindor is the best. Gryffindor is not the best. Ravenclaw is. Cho Chang retorted. Exactly, Marietta agreed. People from Gryffindor always try to sell their house to others, but in reality, they're just a bunch of stupid and reckless fools. You're biased, Hermione pointed out sharply. No, I also think Ravenclaw is the best. Alaric supported Cho Chang and Marietta, explaining, wizards gain power through knowledge. Ravenclaw represents wisdom and knowledge, which is what wizards should pursue. He concluded, although courage, diligence, and shrewdness are essential for wizards, wisdom and knowledge are their essence. Marietta and Cho Chang both clapped. Well said. You'll surely become an excellent Ravenclaw. Professor Flitwick will be pleased to meet you. After carefully considering Alaric's words, the proud Hermione had to nod. I have to admit your reasoning. Now I also hope to be sorted into Ravenclaw. Saying this, her face turned slightly red. Unfortunately, sorting is ultimately decided by the sorting hat. If you're unlucky, you might be sorted into another house, Marietta regretfully reminded. However, having read the original work, Alaric immediately came up with a solution. I heard from others that there is a way to influence the sorting hat's decision. As long as you keep thinking about which house you want to be in, the sorting hat will take your opinion into consideration. You can give it a try. If successful, we can stay in the same house. When he said the last sentence, he stared seriously into Hermione's eyes. Blushing under the gaze of such a handsome guy, Hermione's face turned red as she whispered, Understood, I will try. Next, the four of them enthusiastically discussed Ravenclaw. Cho Chang and Marietta introduced Ravenclaw House, and then Alaric and Hermione gave their evaluations. Cho Chang and Marietta sometimes agreed and supported, sometimes vehemently opposed, and then continued the introduction, creating a lively cycle. The four of them chatted happily, not even noticing that the train had already departed. At around 12:30, a smiling, dimple-faced woman pushing a trolley passed by the compartment. All four bought some snacks from her and happily exchanged and ate. Alaric declined Marietta's Bertie Bott's every flavor beans, as he didn't want to risk tasting flavors like booger. However, Hermione was interested and boldly ate several, only to be scorched by a chili-flavored bean, making her gulp down several cups of water. What truly caught Alaric's interest were the chocolate frogs, particularly the collectible moving cards. These cards with animated characters gave him a bold idea to use this technology to create a collectible trading card game, similar to Magic the Gathering, Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Hearthstone. He knew that in the wizarding world, games like wizard chess were popular, and collecting chocolate frog cards was a widespread hobby. Therefore, developing a trading card game in the wizarding world would undoubtedly have potential, and he could use this as an opportunity to become wealthy. He even thought of hiring Ravenclaw students to develop and manufacture the cards. This technology wasn't particularly advanced in the field of alchemy, and students would likely be willing to earn some extra galleons during their free time. During this period, he could identify truly talented young wizards and officially hire them after graduation. I'm a genius, Alaric thought, feeling a bit proud of himself. However, his thoughts were interrupted by an unexpected event. A round-faced chubby boy knocked on the compartment door. "Sorry," he said tearfully. "I wanted to ask, have you seen my toad?" All four shook their heads, and he immediately burst into tears. "I've lost it again. It always tries to run away from me." "It's okay. We'll help you find it together," Hermione volunteered. Then she suddenly remembered something and turned to ask, "You all will help too, right?" Of course, this fits Hermione's character. Thinking this, Alaric reluctantly stood up and replied, "Fine, I'll help look too." Cho Chang and Marietta looked at each other, initially ready to mind their own business, but seeing the new friends they'd just made, they sighed and reluctantly joined the search. Seeing this scene, the round-faced boy was moved to tears. Thank you all. I'm Neville Longbottom. Thank you for helping me find Trevor." Alaric comfortingly patted his head. "It's okay, we're all classmates, and classmates should help each other. Besides," he paused, a bit proud, "finding things should be left to the professionals." Under the puzzled looks of the others, he shouted, "Himari!" With a meow, a cute little white cat emerged from Alaric's backpack and gracefully leaped into the boy's arms.
What a cute kitten! Cho Chang and Marietta, who hadn't noticed Himari before, were instantly captivated.
Alaric affectionately patted the cat's head. "Himari, we're looking for a toad. Its owner is him, remember?" While saying this, he pointed to Neville. Himari approached, sniffed Neville's scent, and then meowed to show understanding. Satisfied, Alaric nodded and put Himari on the ground. "Let's go then," he ordered. With his command, Himari elegantly strolled down the train corridor, sniffing the air as she walked. Alaric led Neville and the three girls behind. "Can she really understand what you're saying?" Hermione asked. "Yes, Himari has intelligence similar to humans, so of course she can understand," Alaric replied. "Then she must be a magical creature," Marietta concluded. "Is she a Kneazle or a cat with Kneazle ancestry?" "No, Himari is a cat demon," the boy denied. Himari is actually a cat demon from anime Omamori, Himari. But I thought it was a magical creature. "Yeah, I also don't think this cat is a demon. It may be a magical creature," Hermione eagerly answered. But this cat could indeed be a demon." Cho Chang nodded. "My dad told me that any creature, any animal, has the potential to become a demon if given the chance." "Terrifying. Why would you raise a demon? If it were me, I would have never kept one." After hearing this, Neville was startled and involuntarily slowed down, walking to the back of the group.
What's so scary about it? Himari is so cute.
Exactly. Himari is not scary at all. Coward. The girls expressed disdain towards Neville. Generally, girls would be more afraid of strange things like this, but Himari's cuteness had captivated them. They all expressed, even if she is a demon, as long as she is cute, there's no problem. Indeed, in this world, beauty is justice. Alaric, somewhat emotional, patted his own face. "It seems that my future is absolutely bright." After walking along the corridor for a while, Himari suddenly stopped, then entered a compartment. The five immediately followed. In the compartment, two boys were facing each other. One had black hair and glasses, and the other was a red-haired boy. Their clothes were a bit worn, and their appearances resembled the characters from the movies. Alaric guessed their identities at a glance. Harry Potter, the Chosen One, and his sidekick Ron Weasley, the one who would later marry Hermione. On the table in the compartment were snacks and wrappers. It seemed they were originally enjoying some food, but now, the black-haired boy curiously looked at Himari, while the red-haired boy huddled in fear, holding a squeaking mouse in one hand and a shabby wand in the other, randomly pointing it at Himari. There seemed to be a green light coming out of the tip of the wand. Alaric was startled by his actions, recalling that in the original book, Ron often had accidents when casting spells. "Expelliarmus!" Alaric flicked his wrist, and a purple wand appeared in his hand. A red light shot out from the wand tip, and instantly hit the red-haired boy. He let out a miserable cry, and the wand in his hand flew out. With his other hand, Alaric casually reached out and effortlessly caught the flying wand. "Cool," the boy with glasses exclaimed in admiration. "You actually know magic. What's the name of that spell?" Hermione asked excitedly. Cho Chang and Marietta were also impressed by this electrifying scene, applauding him with admiration. "Thank you." Alaric nodded at them, then bent down and returned the shabby wand to Ron. "Sorry about that. I didn't mean to do this, but next time, please don't point your wand at my Himari." Ron hesitated for a moment, then nodded in understanding, clutching his wand tightly. Himari, after completing her mission, jumped back into Alaric's backpack with a satisfied look on her face. Affected by Alaric's disarming charm, Ron Weasley seemed frightened. Even his speech was stuttering. I understand. He swallowed hard, finally regaining composure. I don't like cats. I thought she came in to eat scabbers. Himari would never eat such strange things. Alaric shook his head. He knew that Scabbers the rat was actually the animagus Peter Pettigrew. However, he didn't intend to expose Peter, as doing so would put himself in a suspicious situation. How does a muggle who just entered the magical world know so much? Himari, in response, also mewed and distanced herself from Ron and his rat, apparently sensing something peculiar about Scabbers. Alaric casually picked up Himari and introduced himself to Harry and Ron. He also introduced the other four. Finally, he explained, "We came here to help Neville find his toad." But Neville was sitting in this compartment originally, Harry Potter pointed out, puzzled. Neville, behind them, nodded in agreement. Now, the girls cast skeptical glances at Alaric. "Watch, Himari never makes mistakes," Alaric sneered, and Himari cast a disdainful glance at the others, expressing her disdain for their doubts. She leaped from Alaric's shoulder, gracefully landed on a suitcase, and then used her cat's claws to scratch it. "This is my luggage," Neville blurted out. Alaric gestured for him to open the bag. "Himari means to say that your toad is hiding inside." "Trevor can't be in there. I personally organized the suitcase, and I would have known if Trevor were in there," Neville muttered, but reluctantly opened the suitcase under Alaric's insistence. As expected, in line with Alaric's expectations, as soon as the suitcase was opened, a toad, as if finally liberated, jumped out. With the appearance of the toad, the truth was revealed. Neville had wasted a considerable amount of time going through each compartment, asking about Trevor. But in reality, Trevor had been left in his suitcase the entire time. Himari lifted her chin triumphantly, strutting back and forth before the group, looking like a proud rooster. Watching her adorable and proud demeanor, the girls' hearts melted. They spared no praise, thinking about how they could personally touch Himari. However, Himari ran back into her master's arms with an indifferent look, showing no love for the compliments from the girls. With the matter resolved, the two groups, who had just clashed moments ago, began introducing themselves. When the black-haired boy wearing glasses said his name, Harry Potter, there was an exclamation of surprise. "Is it really you?" Hermione was excited. "I know everything about you. Of course, I bought a few extra reference books, A History of Modern Magic, The Rise and Fall of Dark Arts, Important Magical Events of the 20th Century, all of which mention you." Hearing this, Harry Potter had a bewildered expression. He never knew he was so famous. But, as a typical figure who fought against the Dark Lord and escaped death, Harry had long become a celebrity in the wizarding world. Cho Chang and Marietta couldn't help but take a closer look at him. Cho Chang had mostly lived in the Muggle world, only entering the wizarding world a year ago, so she had no real feelings about this. But Marietta was different. She even wanted to go forward and ask Harry for an autograph. Compared to them, Allaric was much calmer. He expressed a bit of surprise, then had brief conversations with both Harry and Ron, the latter being somewhat neglected in Harry's shadow. Harry felt that Allaric wasn't just interested in his fame, while Ron was touched that Allaric didn't only pay attention to the renowned Harry Potter, but also acknowledged him. Now, even the conflict a few minutes ago, where Alaric disarmed Ron's wand, was completely forgotten. Following that, Alaric bid farewell to them along with the girls and left. As they left, Ron cast an envious and jealous glance at Alaric's back. "He's just a bit better looking, isn't he?" Ron complained to Harry. "He can sit in the same compartment with 3 girls. Although he's a good guy, I bet anyone who walks with him wouldn't be noticed by any girl." Harry nodded in agreement. Although both of them thought Alaric was a good guy, boys tend to unite in their resentment against handsome guys. The so-called handsome guy holding Himari returned to the compartment with the 3 girls in a somewhat helpless manner. On the way, Hermione kept chatting with Marietta about Harry Potter and Voldemort. The two, one having read many books about the magical world and the other with parents working in the Ministry of Magic, were well informed, engaging in gossip topics and occasionally exclaiming in surprise. Cho Chang, on the other hand, listened attentively to their conversation, occasionally chiming in. Only Alaric, who wasn't very interested in gossip, had nothing to say and could only read his own book. Reading alone wasn't boring for Alaric, but soon the girls shifted the topic to him. They discussed the spell he used and how he took out his wand. Hermione, who loved digging into details, was the first to ask him a question. "What spell did you use just now?" she inquired. "You instantly disarmed that redhead's wand." "That was the disarming charm," Alaric casually replied. "It's the most commonly used spell in wizard duels, and the incantation is Expelliarmus." "I know that," Marietta chimed in eagerly. "I remember. This charm was mentioned in Defense Against the Dark Arts class, but the teacher said we would learn it in higher grades. You can actually use such a complicated spell. How did you do it?" Hermione, also a muggle-born like Alaric, was visibly affected. She couldn't wait to ask him for tips. "Actually," Alaric explained, "this spell is not complicated. It's even considered the simplest among the spells used in direct confrontation. Although it doesn't have a powerful offensive effect and can be easily blocked by various counterspells, it has an advantage that surpasses other spells." "What advantage is that?" Hermione asked impatiently. It's the shortest incantation among dual spells, and it can be cast the fastest. Using this spell often gives the caster the advantage of taking the initiative in magical duels. Upon hearing this explanation, Cho Chang and Marietta nodded in understanding, feeling admiration for Alaric's extensive knowledge. However, Hermione was still dissatisfied. She questioned, "I have never seen such an answer in any book, Expelliarmus having the shortest incantation. Where did you read that? I haven't seen anyone mention the length of incantations in any magical books." This is my own conclusion. I compared several relatively simple dual spells, such as the Stunning spell, the Impediment Jinx, the Full Body Bind Curse, and the Dancing Feet spell. After that, I arrived at this conclusion, Alaric replied. But since it's not mentioned in any books, how can you ensure that this is the correct conclusion? Remember, these books were written by the greatest wizards. Even they didn't say this. What makes you think you are right? Hermione challenged. Such a proud girl, unwilling to admit defeat at any time. Let me teach you a lesson. Thinking so, Alaric sternly criticized Hermione. Miss Hermione Granger, I assume you haven't studied Muggle science seriously since being admitted to Hogwarts, have you? Well, not really, but what does that have to do with Muggle science? Hermione blushed a bit and asked back. It has a lot to do with it. Although Muggle science lacks convenience and magic, it is very worthwhile to study in terms of logic and problem-solving methods. Even in the study of magic, you can add a thing or two. It can be used as a reference. For example, when researching the duration of incantations, I only need to maintain my magical power and energy in an equally abundant state. Using the same volume, the same speed, and clear pronunciation, I cast different spells and record the time taken for each. This way, I can roughly compare the lengths of the incantations. This is the controlled variable method used in science, Alaric explained seriously. Finally, he concluded, the spirit of science tells us that practice is the only way to find the truth. Blindly believing in authority is not advisable. Even the theories of the great scientists like Newton have been proven not to be absolute truths in modern times, and they have limitations in many aspects. So why do you think that the wizards who wrote these textbooks are absolutely correct? After all, magic is not as rigorous as science in terms of precision. If these predecessors' words are completely correct, how are new spells created? After all, their books did not mention these spells. Following your reasoning, the entire wizarding world would never progress. This explanation left Marietta, who came from a wizarding family, confused. Indeed, many wizards lacked logical reasoning abilities. But Hermione Granger, who came from a Muggle family and had long been in the Muggle world, barely understood what Alaric was saying. This kind of thinking, I've never heard of it before. Cho Chang looked admiringly at her fellow Muggle-born. Using scientific methods to study magic, you're really a genius. Hermione, on the other hand, felt a bit teary-eyed from Alaric's words. She had always considered herself intelligent and was unwilling to admit defeat to Alaric. However, Alaric's theory was reasonable, leaving her unable to refute. She found herself in an embarrassing situation. She wanted to argue, but couldn't, and she wanted to apologize, but felt embarrassed. In the end, she chose to apologize. Sorry, she whispered. I admit I was wrong. But before she finished speaking, she ran out crying. A boy, in his early 20s, after combining his 2 lifetimes, managed to make a little girl, the female protagonist, cry. That's quite an achievement. It's embarrassing for a man in his 20s after adding his 2 lives to make an 11-year-old girl cry, and it's not something he can boast about. Although his physical age is only 11, Alaric hasn't consciously realized it, and hasn't lived as a child. Perhaps before the age of 7, Alaric might have pretended in front of others, but as he grew older, he became more accustomed to handling things in his own way. In the eyes of others, this made him unusually mature for his age. Seeing the little girl crying and leaving the compartment, he sighed helplessly and chased after her. I always feel like he is so mature, Marietta said, watching Alaric's back. I feel the same way. Cho Chang nodded in agreement. Other boys of the same age only know how to sulk. They never take the initiative to admit mistakes and comfort girls. In the corridor, Hermione looked at the scenery speeding by outside the window, intentionally not turning around to let Alaric see her teary eyes. All right, don't be angry. Is it okay if I admit I was wrong? Alaric approached, habitually patting Hermione's fluffy head, just like he did with Hamari. This time, it was as if he had stepped on a cat's tail. Hermione turned around angrily, coquettishly saying, "Don't touch my hair. I'm not a little kid anymore." Her sudden turn almost made her collide with Alaric's face. Then, the first thing she saw was Alaric's ambiguous smile, and the distance between their cheeks was less than 5 centimeters. Hermione's face blushed again, and she quickly turned her head. "Why are you following me? Out," she whispered. "Isn't it because I saw a little girl crying at the drop of a hat? I'm afraid her tears will flood the train, so I chased after her to stop her," Allaric replied. This sounded even more like teasing a child. "I won't flood the train with my tears," Hermione refuted reflexively, then immediately realized that Alaric was teasing her. So, she angrily used her small fists to punch him twice. "All right, don't be sulky. Crying won't solve any problems," Alaric said, holding the hand that she had just used to punch him. This made Hermione's face even redder. She had never been treated like this by a boy, being touched on the head and holding hands. Unfortunately, Alaric not only lacked romantic experience, but also had no intention of dating an 11-year-old girl right now. In such a situation, he would naturally do things to disrupt the atmosphere. He began lecturing Hermione. In fact, having different opinions is common in learning and research. When someone holds a different opinion from you, you shouldn't argue with them out of anger. Instead, carefully consider whether their point of view is reasonable and acceptable. If their view is more reasonable, we need to actively learn and incorporate it into our knowledge system. Conversely, we need to think about the flaws in their view and refute them, so crying won't solve the problem. These words were like a teacher educating a student. The ambiguous atmosphere was immediately shattered, but Hermione was, after all, a unique little school tyrant. She vaguely nodded in understanding. However, she felt a bit uncomfortable in her heart, and for Alaric, she inexplicably harbored a bit of unreasonable dissatisfaction. If Cho Chang and Marietta were present, they would definitely say that they were two weirdos. Alaric, Hermione said very formally after listening, you are indeed a knowledgeable person and good at learning. After entering Hogwarts, can I consult you? Facing the serious request from her, Alaric happily replied, of course, I'm happy to chat with such a cute girl like you. Sometimes he indeed forgets his way of speaking and says things that can be misunderstood. Hearing such words, Hermione, who had just returned to normal, blushed again and hurriedly returned to the compartment. Inside the compartment, Cho Chang and Marietta, who were eavesdropping on the door, had initially placed their ears against the door, wanting to overhear what Alaric and Hermione were talking about in the corridor, how Alaric would comfort Hermione, and what would happen. Unfortunately, Hermione had walked too far out when she first left, and the place where the two were chatting was far from the compartment door. As a result, Cho Chang and Marietta didn't hear anything. Now that Hermione had returned, blushing, they rushed back to their original positions. Pretending to eat snacks and chat, they managed not to let Hermione and Alaric notice anything unusual. Time passed quickly. In the blink of an eye, the sky had darkened, and the train was finally approaching Hogwarts Castle. Alaric happily chatted with the three girls the entire afternoon, and they became friends. Although he had never had a romantic relationship or many female friends before the transmigration, dealing with a few girls was no problem. As they packed their belongings and prepared to disembark, a commotion and fighting noises erupted outside the door. Alaric listened carefully and recognized the voices of Harry and Ron. Additionally, there was a distinctive arrogant voice, which must be Draco Malfoy. In Alaric's impression, Draco Malfoy wasn't a genuinely bad kid. Born into a sacred 28 pureblood wizard family, influenced by his parents and relatives who were Death Eaters, he developed a selfish and arrogant character, especially towards Muggles. However, due to Alaric being a Muggle himself, he naturally stood in opposition to Malfoy. So, even knowing Malfoy's true nature, Alaric didn't want to have much interaction with this pureblood wizard. After all, dealing with naughty kids was troublesome. Moreover, Alaric's current focus was on two things: researching magic and increasing his powers, and building good friendships with Hermione. He planned to use the influence and changes on Hermione to verify his speculations and research on the plot. On the one hand, his energy was limited, and influencing one person was more convenient than three. On the other hand, compared to boys, he preferred interacting with cute girls. So, for now, he didn't intend to purposefully have much contact with Harry and Ron. He listened to the sounds outside the door, where Malfoy and his two lackeys, Crabbe and Goyle, were arguing with Harry and Ron. Then a brawl ensued, and Malfoy was bitten by Scabbers, after which both groups went their separate ways. Finally, after a long journey, the train sounded its whistle, and its speed gradually slowed down. In the night, the tall black shadow of Hogwarts loomed closer and closer. At last they arrived at their destination, Alaric's long-awaited magical school. The students pushed and shoved one after another, squeezing off the train. Taking advantage of his strength, Alaric led the three girls through the crowd, creating a bloody path. After getting off the train, they were greeted by a small platform, and a loud voice shouted, first-year students, come over here." The owner of the voice specifically mentioned Harry Potter. Alaric knew this was Hagrid, the gamekeeper of Hogwarts. He quickly and casually said goodbye to the two second-year students, Cho Chang and Marietta, then took Hermione and headed toward the source of the sound. Being led by a boy like this made Hermione a bit uncomfortable, but she pretended to be calm and followed along. Hagrid, with his giant bloodline, had a towering figure that exceeded various basketball players, visible from afar. All the new students followed him, stumbling along a small path, approaching a magnificent view of the huge castle standing tall on the mountain slope, with turrets rising into the night sky and windows twinkling under the stars. Hagrid led the students to board small boats, each accommodating 4 people. After Alaric and Hermione boarded, Harry and Ron followed. Harry and Ron warmly greeted them. The fleet set off, and along the way, there was silence. Everyone quietly admired the breathtaking view of the colossal castle approaching as they sailed across the lake. Occasionally, a sigh could be heard. After passing through a stretch of ivy, the fleet entered a dark tunnel, seemingly entering the underground of the castle. Finally, they arrived at a place similar to an underground dock, and then climbed up a path of broken stones and pebbles. The new students disembarked one after another, and Hagrid led them to a massive oak door. Finally, they stood in front of Hogwarts. Hagrid knocked on the oak door 3 times, and it opened immediately. "First-year students, Professor McGonagall," Hagrid said. "Thank you, Hagrid. I'll take it from here." Professor McGonagall nodded and led the new students further into the castle. Passing through the grand entrance hall, Professor McGonagall brought them to a small room at the other end of the Great Hall. "Welcome to Hogwarts," she said. "The start of term feast is about to begin, but before you take your seats in the dining hall, you'll be sorted into your houses. The sorting is a very important ceremony because while you are here, your house will be something like your family within Hogwarts. You will have classes with the rest of your house, sleep in your house dormitory, and spend free time in your house common room." Afterwards, she briefly introduced the 4 houses, mentioned some guidelines, and then asked the new students to wait for a moment before she promptly left the room. As soon as Professor McGonagall left, the crowd immediately became noisy. The new students excitedly chatted, speculating about the sorting process and which house they wanted to join. "Do you think we can be sorted into Ravenclaw?" Hermione nudged Alaric, feeling a bit uneasy. Although the girl was proud, she felt a bit anxious in the unfamiliar magical world. Of course, Alaric encouraged confidently. "I heard that Hogwarts has a talking hat. When new students put it on, it can determine the suitable house based on their personality traits. But what if my personality doesn't fit Ravenclaw?" Hermione became even more anxious upon hearing this. In the original story, the sorting hat initially considered Hermione suitable for both Gryffindor and Ravenclaw, but ultimately chose Gryffindor. In other words, Hermione is suitable for Ravenclaw. But in order to prevent any mishaps from happening, Alaric reminded her of the method to influence the sorting hat's decision. "Didn't I tell you? I heard about a method. Strong desires can change the sorting hat's opinion. As long as you strongly express the desire to join a particular house, the sorting hat will take your opinion into consideration." Hermione nodded, feeling a bit reassured. However, Ron chimed in with his opinion. "Why join Ravenclaw? Trust me, Gryffindor is the best house." His loud voice immediately attracted the attention of the surrounding new students, and he found himself overwhelmed by various responses. Some students vehemently disagreed, stating that Slytherin was the best house, while others were advocating for Ravenclaw. On the other hand, some wizard kids who favored Gryffindor loudly supported Ron. The scene became as noisy as a marketplace. Taking Hermione away from the center of the commotion, Alaric comforted her. "Don't listen to fools. You might catch their foolishness." His words amused Hermione, easing some of her inner tension. The commotion continued for quite some time, but suddenly the noise turned into high-pitched screams. Screams akin to a horror movie scene attracted the attention of Alaric and Hermione. They turned to see Hermione's smiling face immediately vanish, replaced by her open mouth, nearly screaming. This was not just like a horror movie scene, it was an actual horror movie scene. About 20 ghosts suddenly appeared on the wall. These pearly white, semi-transparent ghosts slid across the room, talking to each other and paying little attention to the first-year students. They seemed to be arguing about something. Compared to the startled new students, Alaric was much calmer. Instead, he was interested in the physical state of these ghosts. Throughout various magical worldviews, only the ghosts in Harry Potter had normal intelligence and were not influenced by negative emotions. Apart from being able to touch and affect tangible matter, differentiating them from humans, they had thought patterns similar to ordinary people. They even had their own society. In contrast, ghosts in other worlds were either of low intelligence, lacked thinking abilities, harbored hatred with thought patterns vastly different from humans, or desired reincarnation, and had no attachment to reality, lacking strong emotions. Regrettably, Alaric currently lacked the ability and sufficient knowledge to study ghosts. However, he was determined to thoroughly study these ghosts one day in the future. Now, he could only comfort the nervous Hermione in a low voice. Most girls were always afraid of things like ghosts. 20.
Then they heard the ghosts talking with the new students.
"Freshmen! Oh, I suppose you're ready for the test?" Fat Friar smiled at them. Some students silently nodded. "I hope you get into Hufflepuff," the friar said. "I used to attend that house." "Now move forward," a thin voice said. "The sorting ceremony is about to begin." Professor McGonagall returned, and the ghosts floated away, disappearing through the opposite wall. "Now, line up," Professor McGonagall told the first-year students. "Follow me." Following the crowd, Alaric passed through a double door and arrived at a luxurious dining hall. They never imagined such a magical, magnificent place. Students from other houses were already seated at 4 long tables, and above the tables, thousands of floating candles illuminated the dining hall. The 4 tables were adorned with glittering gold plates and tall wine glasses. At the head of the hall, there was another long table for the teachers. Professor McGonagall led the first-year students to the other side, asking them to face the senior students in a row, with the teachers behind them. In the grand hall, candlelight flickered, and hundreds of faces staring at them resembled pale lanterns. Ghosts mingled among the students, emitting a faint silvery glow. Looking up, they could see the velvety black ceiling adorned with twinkling starlight. Alaric heard Hermione whisper, "The ceiling here has been enchanted, and it looks like the sky outside. I read about it in Hogwarts, A History of the School." It was hard to believe that there was a ceiling up there, and it was equally difficult to believe that the dining hall was not open to the sky. Professor McGonagall placed a four-legged stool in front of the first-year students, placing an old and dirty pointy wizard hat on it. Alaric knew this legendary hat well. It was the Sorting Hat. He began to look forward to the classic scene, the Sorting Hat singing its annual song that changed every year. Next, the hat started to move. A wide seam appeared around the brim, forming a mouth-like opening. The hat began to sing. "Oh, you may not think I'm pretty, but don't judge on what you see. I'll eat myself if you can find a smarter hat than me. You can keep your bowlers black, your top's hats sleek and tall, for I'm the Hogwarts Sorting Hat, and I can cap them all. There's nothing hidden in your head. The Sorting Hat can't see, so try me on and I will tell you where you ought to be. You might belong in Gryffindor, where dwell brave of heart. Their daring, nerve, and chivalry set Gryffindors apart. You might belong in Hufflepuff, where they are just and loyal. Those patient Hufflepuffs are true and unafraid of toil, or yet wise old Ravenclaw. If you've a ready mind, where those of wit and learning will always find their kind, or perhaps in Slytherin, you'll make your real friends. Those cunning folk use any means to achieve their ends. So put me on, don't be afraid, and you won't get in a flap. You're safe in my hands, though I have none, for I'm a thinking cap." The song lasted for about 5 minutes, and after the Sorting Hat finished singing, the whole hall erupted into applause. However, Alaric felt that the applause was somewhat insincere. The strange song didn't seem to resonate well with the audience. The Sorting Hat bowed to the 4 tables in turn, and then it stopped moving. The formal sorting ceremony began. Professor McGonagall walked a few steps forward, holding a roll of parchment in her hands. "I will call out your names, and you will put on the hat, sit on the stool, and await your sorting," she explained. Hannah Abbott, a rosy-cheeked girl with 2 golden braids, stepped forward. Alaric remembered from the original story that she later married Neville Longbottom. She stumbled out of the line, put on the hat, which conveniently covered her eyes, and after a brief pause, "Hufflepuff," the hat announced. Applause and cheers erupted from the right table as Hannah Abbott took her seat. "Susan Bones, 7. Hufflepuff," the hat declared again. Susan quickly joined Hannah. "Terry Boot, Ravenclaw." The sorting continued. "Hermione Granger." After a few names, it was Hermione's turn. She practically ran to the stool, looking back anxiously. Alaric smiled, nodded at her, and she felt a bit relieved. She quickly placed the hat on her head. This time, instead of immediately announcing the house, the Sorting Hat seemed to hesitate for 2 or 3 seconds before reluctantly declaring Ravenclaw. Alaric applauded excitedly. Not only was he happy that Hermione was sorted into Ravenclaw, but it also indicated that the plot was not unchangeable, and might suggest that the destiny represented by the plot may not even exist. The students at the second table on the left cheered and clapped. Cho Chang and Marietta stood up to welcome Hermione into their group. The Sorting Hat continued to call names, and the crowd gradually diminished. When it was Neville's turn, the boy ran to Gryffindor with his hat on, completely forgetting to take it off, which caused quite a joke. Finally, Alaric. This name attracted the attention of the wizard kids. Alaric walked out confidently, drawing the gaze of the students, especially the girls who marveled at his handsome appearance and the stylish Mages Association uniform, different from the plain and dark cloaks of other wizard kids. Among them, it caused countless exclamations and discussions. The boys wanted to know where such a beautiful cloak came from, while the girls wanted to know who such a handsome guy was. Allaric held the Sorting Hat in his hands, feeling its slimy texture, realizing how dirty it was. Combined with the unpleasant smell emanating from it, he felt as if he were holding a rotting orange. He wanted to throw it out immediately. Suppressing his disgust, Alaric put on the Sorting Hat. As soon as it touched his head, the hat exclaimed loudly, startling everyone at Hogwarts. "This is strange. It's the first time I can't see a newcomer's thoughts." The hat's voice echoed in Alaric's mind. "In your mind, I only see a world of chaos and constant change. What have you done?" "I don't know either," Alaric replied playfully in his mind. But he realized that the experiences and training in the time tunnel had not only granted him unlimited progress in his abilities and natural talent for time and space, but also a tough and impenetrable soul. The Sorting Hat seemed to be at a loss for words, hesitating for 2 or 3 seconds before reluctantly uttering Ravenclaw. Alaric, feeling excited, clapped his hands. Not only was he pleased that he had successfully conveyed the idea of Ravenclaw to the Sorting Hat, but he also felt a sense of liberation, a belief that the plot could be altered and that the so-called fate might not be absolute. The wizard kids at the second table on the left applauded as Alaric confidently walked toward them. Unable to read Alaric's thoughts, the Sorting Hat couldn't make a judgment about him. After hesitating for a while, it finally yielded to Professor McGonagall's urging. Well, I'll make an exception this time. It's up to you to decide where you want to go, boy. Which house do you choose? Ravenclaw, Alaric replied. Ravenclaw, the Sorting Hat shouted loudly. Then it left a parting message in his mind. I will remember you, child. Most Ravenclaw students were girls. When they saw such a handsome guy sorted into Ravenclaw, they erupted in joyful cheers, warmly welcoming Alaric. Alaric sat among the girls, politely dealing with their enthusiasm. Most of them wanted to get to know him, and the older students, especially the girls, were eager for a romantic date with him. Alaric had to gracefully decline one after another. During this time, he overheard Hermione and Cho Chang complaining. Shameless. Others inquired about the source of his cloak, and Alaric introduced his design and Madame Malkin's shop to them, earning admiration and praise. This was his first time facing so many girls at once. If it were in his previous life during college, he would have been too nervous to speak. Now, however, he could handle it with ease. Of course, dealing with college girls was much more challenging than dealing with the girls at Hogwarts. The last one to cause a stir during the sorting was, of course, Harry Potter. Everyone wanted to see the boy who survived a deadly encounter with Voldemort. When he was sorted into Gryffindor, cheers erupted from that table. The Weasley twins shouted, "We've got Potter! We've got Potter!" Even the Gryffindor ghost welcomed him. The last 3 students were sorted. Lisa Turpin became a Ravenclaw. Ron Weasley was sorted into Gryffindor. Blaise Zabini was sorted into Slytherin. Dumbledore stood up, looking at the students with a smile, spreading his arms wide. It seemed that nothing made him happier than seeing the students gathered. "Welcome," he said. "Welcome to a new year at Hogwarts. Before we begin our banquet, I would like to say a few words. And here they are. Nitwit, Blubber, Oddment, Tweak, thank you." He sat back down. Everyone applauded and cheered. However, in reality, all the young wizards were puzzled by his last words. What does that sentence mean? Hermione frowned. Never mind that, Cho Chang replied. Dumbledore is a great wizard, just a bit crazy. He's not crazy, Alaric interjected. Read those words backward in Latin, and it's I am up to no good. You know Latin too? Hermione was extremely surprised, even dropping her pumpkin pie without noticing. Yes, the day after I decided to go to Hogwarts, I started learning Latin, Alaric replied while enjoying a plate of roasted lamb in front of him. I also studied ancient Celtic and Old Norse, which are historically significant and have a mythological flavor. I thought learning magic might require them, and it turns out I was right. Old Celtic and Old Norse too. I don't even know what they are. The girls were amazed at his genius and erudition, especially Hermione. As a fellow top student, she genuinely admired Alaric, feeling defeated in the face of such a prodigy. Next was the time to eat. Alaric thoroughly enjoyed the delicious food at Hogwarts, despite the universally known fact of British cuisine. Although it was well known to the world, the wizarding world in Britain is completely different from the Muggle world. He is overwhelmed by these delicacies. Aside from being a bit too sweet, he found every dish praiseworthy. If I were from the modern world, I would love them even more, was Alaric's final evaluation. However, even Cho Chang didn't catch the meaning. After everyone had their fill, Dumbledore casually waved his wand, and instantly all the dishes disappeared. He stood up, and the hall returned to silence. Oh, now that everyone is full and had enough to drink, I have a few more things to say. First-year students, be aware that the Forbidden Forest on the campus is strictly off-limits. Some older students should also take note of this. Also, Mr. Filch, the caretaker, has reminded me to tell you not to use magic in the corridors during breaks. The Quidditch tryouts will be held in the second week of this semester. Those who want to join their house teams, please contact Madam Hooch. Lastly, I must inform you all that anyone who doesn't wish to encounter accidents, painful deaths, please do not enter the corridor on the third floor to the right. The new students were in discussion, and even Hermione was asking Cho Chang for explanations. But even Cho Chang found the last rule inexplicable, claiming it was newly added this semester. Only Alaric knew that the biggest surprise of the school year would come from that corridor. However, judging by the lively discussions among the students, legends like Hogwarts' Seven Wonders were popular in both worlds. When the discussions of the young wizards subsided, Dumbledore made the next decision. Now before you all go to bed, let's sing the school song together, Dumbledore announced loudly. The smiles on the faces of the other teachers seemed to freeze. Dumbledore gently flicked his wand, and a long golden ribbon floated out of it. The ribbon twisted and turned in the air above the high tables like a snake, forming lines of text. Alaric could see that these were the lyrics of the Hogwarts school song. Choose your preferred tune, Dumbledore said. Ready, sing. The entire student body and faculty burst into song. The sound was extremely unpleasant. Himari, who was sleeping soundly in the backpack, was awakened by the chorus, covering her ears and meowing in protest. Everyone finished singing the school song in a disorganized manner. Only the Weasley twins continued singing. following the slow melody of the funeral march. Dumbledore conducted the last few bars for them, and when they finished, his applause was the loudest. Ah, music, he wiped his eyes, saying, more magical than anything we do here. Now it's bedtime. Off you go to your dormitories. The new students followed their house prefects out of the Great Hall, through various corridors. Alaric recognized the Ravenclaw female prefect. Her name was Penelope Clearwater, with long curly brown hair. Her beautiful appearance exuded elegance and intellect. For Alaric, her charm far surpassed Hermione and Cho Chang, who were still young. He was particularly interested in this girl, who played a minor role in the original work, but frequently appeared in fanfiction. Accompanied by another male prefect, they led the eaglets to the tower on the west side of the castle, the top of the Ravenclaw Tower. In front of a worn-out wooden board, there was a bronze door knocker shaped like an eagle. Unlike other houses, Ravenclaw's common room doesn't have a password. You need to answer the door knocker's question and be recognized to enter, Penelope explained. She knocked on the door and the eagle's beak immediately opened. Instead of a bird's cry, a gentle, musical voice spoke. What will you break once you say it? So who would like to give it a try? She looked expectantly at the new students, especially giving Alaric a few more glances. Although Penelope valued intellect more, she couldn't deny that she had a high initial favorability toward him due to his charming appearance. Facing the expectant gaze of the female prefect, Alaric gladly stepped forward. Silence, he answered. Nicely done, the eagle-shaped door knocker praised, and the door swung open.
This was just a riddle game.
Alaric was a bit speechless. Wasn't this door's question too easy to crack? However, in reality, due to the lack of proper basic education, most young wizards lacked logical reasoning skills. For clever Ravenclaws, riddles were often safer than passwords. Penelope nodded appreciatively at Alaric, and her favorability toward him increased significantly. This was because he not only had a charming appearance, but also demonstrated intelligence. She then introduced the new students. Congratulations, I am Prefect Penelope Clearwater. I'm delighted to welcome you to Ravenclaw House. Our emblem is an eagle soaring high above the unattainable peak. Our colors are sky blue and bronze. She went on to elaborate on Ravenclaw's achievements, characteristics, evaluations of other houses, and finally mentioned the house ghost, the Grey Lady, Ravenclaw's daughter. She would provide assistance to Ravenclaw students. The Ravenclaw common room was a large circular room with elegant arched windows on the walls, adorned with blue and bronze silk. Ravenclaw students could see the beautiful scenery outside through the windows. The ceiling was a dome decorated with stars, and the deep blue carpet beneath also had stars. There were tables, chairs, and bookshelves in the room. In a niche opposite the door was a marble bust of Rowena Ravenclaw, and the door next to it led to the dormitories above. The two prefects brought the new students to their dormitory. The dormitory was a 4-person room with 4 beds, each with 4 canopy pillars, and hanging above were burgundy velvet canopies. Alaric opened his suitcase, tidied up his belongings a bit, and then placed Hamari at the head of his bed. In the evening, Hamari seemed energetic, rolling around on the velvet bedspread. The names of the 3 roommates were Anthony Goldstein, a blonde Jewish boy, Terry Boot with brown hair, and Michael Corner with black hair. They were supporting characters with names and plot lines in the original work. They, Alaric, and his 2 other dorm mates, Kevin Entwistle and Stephen Cornfoot, made up the only 6 boys in the Ravenclaw new intake. They couldn't even fill 2 dormitories. But in fact, Ravenclaw had always had more female students, so in terms of the number of male students, this year's intake already exceeded previous years. After exchanging brief greetings with their new roommates, everyone changed into their pajamas and lay down to sleep. The journey to the school was indeed exhausting. Alaric sat on the soft bed, holding the little cat, reading a book while lost in thought. It had been 11 years since he arrived in this world, transforming from an ordinary person into a wizard, venturing into the mysteries of magic. The mysterious gates were about to open for him. Starting tomorrow, he could study the secrets of magic in this castle and explore the true nature of the world. Even with the soul of a reincarnator, he found himself too excited to sleep. He waited until all 3 roommates were asleep before getting up and approaching the fireplace. Humari was curious too and followed him. She also remembered the monthly summoning that her master would perform. This was an ability Alaric awakened at the age of 6. As his sense of time and space continued to improve, he often felt a throbbing sensation in his heart. Then, when he turned 6, he finally had enough mental strength to respond to that throbbing sensation, communicate with another world, and perform summoning. However, most of the time, his summonings were in vain. Occasionally, the things he could summon were just common items like food, sand, or daily necessities. Fortunately, he sometimes managed to get some specialties from the other world. Some of these specialties even came with unique powers, such as the Doran's Ring, Konoha Forehead Protector, and other items. 12. Most of these were limited to that, and summoning Hamari was just an extremely lucky incident. This time, his luck seemed to be in play again. Silently, a crack opened in the void, and without further ado, it released a large object. It was a steampunk-style metal sphere, about 1 meter in diameter. When it fell to the ground, it made a muffled sound. indicating its considerable weight. Alla reached out to touch it, but before he could react, the sphere opened on its own. Just like a lotus unfolding its petals, the shell of the sphere opened neatly, revealing everything it contained. Curled up inside was a beautiful girl whose entire body was made up of gears and clockwork. She had golden hair and a silver shell, or was it skin? A massive winding key was inserted into her back. Even without reading the information that came with the summoning, just from her appearance, Alaric could tell who she was. Valoran Continent, the Lady of Clockwork, Oriana. The origin of the Clockwork Maiden Oriana had two explanations provided by Riot Games. According to the first, the creator of the Clockwork Lady created this robot in memory of his daughter Oriana, who accidentally passed away. In the second explanation, Oriana was once a girl with flesh and blood. However, an accident in the lower levels of Zaun indirectly caused her to contract a severe illness. Her body, gradually deteriorating, had to be replaced with precise artificial organs, one after another, until there was no human flesh left in her. Oriana herself was proficient in precise mechanical manufacturing. Her mechanical heart and the ball-shaped puppet were all crafted by her own hands. According to the so-called scientists in Valoran, their version of science was quite different from Earth science. It was a unique blend of magic and technology that they referred to as Hextech. In other words, Oriana's proficiency in precise mechanical manufacturing included some knowledge of Valoran's magic. The collision of magic between Valoran and the wizarding world of Harry Potter? It was indeed an interesting idea, but the current priority was to understand Oriana's situation. However, how could he awaken, or rather activate, the mechanical girl in front of him? After pondering for a while, Alaric finally came up with the most obvious solution: wind up the key. What was the significance of the giant winding key behind Oriana? Perhaps it was also a way to initiate Oriana. He walked behind Oriana and tried to turn her winding key. Turning the key was even simpler than he had imagined. Alaric only exerted a little force, and it could be easily turned. As the shaft turned, it emitted the sounds of springs and gears. However, it quickly quieted down, just like a machine that had been idle for a long time and became smooth after being restarted. Only the sensation of turning the key constantly reminded Alaric that he was facing a mechanical creation. After Alaric turned the key counterclockwise 3.5 times, it reached its limit. When he let go, the key began to rotate steadily and slowly clockwise. With this rhythmic rotation, Alaric could feel a spiritual throb, a soul awakening within the mechanical body before him. It established a contract-like connection with his own soul. This feeling also occurred when he summoned Himari. This was probably his summoning technique, signing a contract between the summoning and the summoner after summoning a creature. He could feel himself taking the lead in the contract, unveiling the secrets of the souls of both Oriana and Himari. As the key continued to rotate, the magical glow began to emanate from the intricate patterns on Oriana's mechanical body. Alaric turned to look at his 3 roommates. They remained undisturbed and were sleeping peacefully. After about a minute, the glow gradually dissipated. Following that, Oriana suddenly opened her eyes. The crystal, or rather crystal-crafted eyes, emitted a golden light. Curling up, she sat on the ground, hiding her little face behind her knees. Only her sparkling eyes stared at Alaric, revealing an emotion that no machine should possess. At this moment, she gazed at Alaric, and Alaric gazed back at her. Their eyes met. "Hello, Oriana." Alaric reached out his hand to her. "Hello, Daddy. I'm so glad to see you." Oriana happily took Alaric's hand and stood up. Her voice was very pleasant, but her pronunciation was a typical mechanical style, and her tone was not even as human-like as an AI assistant like Siri. However, Alaric could sense emotions in her voice that surpassed what beings like Siri could express, human emotions. Her hand was cold, but had a warm texture, covered with delicate patterns. When he pulled her up, Alaric felt a bit of strain. After all, she was an all-metal mechanical body, and he estimated that she weighed around 100 kilograms. Standing up, Oriana held the metal hem of her skirt with both hands, elegantly performing a standard curtsy to Alaric. Then, with a wave of her right hand, the metal shell that served as packaging immediately closed and folded into a half-meter diameter metal ball on the ground. The gears on the surface of the ball started running, and silver blue light emerged from the embedded crystals. It then smoothly floated up. So this was her puppet. The Clockwork Lady Oriana finally unfolded completely before him. Seeing this, Alaric could finally ask the question that had been lingering in his mind. "Oriana, why do you call me Daddy?" However, he did not get the answer he expected. Daddy is Dad. That was her answer. Next, Alaric inquired about her abilities. Oriana, being obedient, answered all questions, giving Alaric a general understanding of her. Oriana did indeed possess human-level intelligence. However, since her thought core was based on Hextech and Soul technology, it formed personality rather than computation. Thus, she didn't have the computational power like a regular computer. This was the difference between Hextech and scientific technology. Both had intelligent cores, but the former excelled in spirituality and soul, while the latter excelled in computational speed. However, Alaric believed that this could be upgraded. By using magic to simulate electronic technology, manufacturing a CPU, and unifying the language for programming both the CPU and the thought core, Oriana could have another brain as a Hextech CPU. This way, the thought core could focus on personality and emotions, while the CPU focused on computation. Oriana could become a super artificial intelligence with human thought patterns and the logical and computational abilities of a supercomputer. Regarding her knowledge, Oriana behaved like a patient with amnesia, having a complete blank in her memories of past experiences, but possessing sufficient common sense about life. Furthermore, she was indeed highly skilled in the precise mechanical manufacturing of Hextech. Although Oriana was a long-range hero in League of Legends, in reality, Oriana had considerable close-quarters combat capabilities. Her metal shell was sturdier than Alaric had imagined. Conventional physical attacks at the level of missiles couldn't budge her metal shell. Moreover, she had strong resistance to magic. Powered by the Hextech Crystal Heart, she also had substantial power, with a maximum output reaching several tons or even tens of tons. In addition, she could launch magical missiles from her palm, a functionality similar to Oriana's basic attack in the game. She possessed an anti-gravity system to maintain her suspension. At maximum output, it was equivalent to flying, although the speed couldn't exceed the speed of sound. Most importantly, as a mechanical being, she could continue to upgrade herself. With advanced technology, she could become infinitely stronger, whether it was strengthening her strength, attaching various weapons externally, or increasing her speed. However, the most powerful ability of the Lady of Clockwork wasn't within herself, but in her ball-shaped mechanical sphere. All of Oriana's spells revolved around that. It was an autonomous mechanical body with a certain level of intelligence. It would follow Oriana and assist her. Oriana could give it special commands, making it unleash magical effects, such as Command Dissonance, Command Attack, Command Protect, and Command Shockwave, which were the four most typical commands. In fact, it could do much more. After learning about Oriana, Alaric felt pleasantly surprised and excited. The seemingly frail and stiff mechanical girl in front of him was indeed powerful enough. In the world of Harry Potter, most of the time, she would be sufficient to protect the not yet powerful Alaric. Even facing Voldemort and Dumbledore at their peak, she had enough ability to escape with him. However, he still faced a significant problem: how to hide Oriana and her puppet. A girl who was 1.62 meters tall and a metal ball with a half-meter diameter couldn't possibly be hidden from the eyes of his classmates and Dumbledore forever. But how could he explain Oriana's existence to others? Finally, Alaric barely came up with a solution: the shrinking spell. This was the first spell he learned, and currently the one he was most proficient at. He planned to use the shrinking spell to shrink Oriana down to the size of a figurine, so he could carry her around like a toy. In his opinion, since the wizard's chest set in this world was alive, pulling out a moving figurine wouldn't be a big deal. The only problem was that the shrinking spell didn't work on living beings. For mechanical life like Oriana, he didn't know what the effect would be. Well, let's give it a try. Alaric took out his wand and gently tapped Oriana. Reducio. Fortunately, the shrinking spell worked on mechanical life, and Oriana successfully shrank to the size of his palm. Her puppet also turned into a tiny metal ball. Oriana happily climbed up Alaric's arm when he held her up. She then jumped onto Amari, riding on her and having a great time. Feeling the same contract between Oriana and Alaric, Himari also played happily with her until Alaric grabbed her by the neck and lifted them both onto the bed. Before going to sleep, Alaric asked a quiet question. Oriana, what is your wish after coming to this world? I want to be with my dad forever and then take a good look at the world. In reality, Oriana's appearance caused quite a stir, contrary to what Alaric had imagined. As a figurine doll, she was too exquisite and beautiful. Alaric's 3 roommates all wanted to take a closer look at her. Michael Corner even wanted to hold her and examine her, but he was promptly refused without hesitation. Oriana shyly crawled under Alaric's cloak, slipped into the pocket of his robe, only revealing her head to observe secretly. Since then, Alaric became the most popular student in Ravenclaw, both among boys and girls. Boys lined up eager to see Oriana with their own eyes, while girls were drawn in by his appearance and the cute Himari. In the Ravenclaw common room and at the dining table, there were always people crowded around him, chattering incessantly and causing him annoyance. However, there were exceptions. Hermione mostly stuck with him, claiming they were studying together. Cho Chang always shuttled back and forth between her original friend group and him, but these two girls didn't make him feel irritated. Then there was a beautiful senior prefect, Penelope Clearwater, who didn't join the crowd watching him. Although she didn't hide her affection for him, she never did anything to make him uncomfortable. Due to persistent harassment, Alaric often wore a cold expression to discourage strangers from approaching him. The result was that, in the eyes of most people, he was molded into an aloof image. Boys and girls gradually stopped approaching him, but to Alaric's dismay, his popularity among girls continued to rise. These girls even called him Prince Charming and Heartthrob. Whether they had Stockholm Syndrome or were masochistic, he didn't know. Among the boys, only his 3 roommates had truly become friends with him so far. Especially after learning that he was a Muggle-born orphan from an orphanage, Slytherin boys began to consciously reject him. "You're just a superficial mudblood." Draco Malfoy once commented on him like this in front of him. The result was that in the entire break, he was hit by the Levicorpus spell and hung upside down on the corridor ceiling until Professor Snape, who rushed over after hearing the news, saved him before the class. As a result, Ravenclaw lost 10 points, but no one blamed Alaric. Gryffindor students even developed a higher opinion of him. For Alaric, these welcomes or resistances were meaningless. His main goals were studying plots and learning magic. In fact, for the professors, Alaric was undoubtedly an excellent student. He could perfectly complete the tasks assigned by the teachers in Transfiguration, Charms, and Potions. No classroom question could trouble him. Of course, there was the famous know-it-all Miss Granger. This pair of inseparable study nerds was loved by the professors, and Ravenclaw's house points were skyrocketing. They were also regulars at Madame Pence's library. After class, the two of them always went to the library to continue studying, and Cho Chang also joined them, studying together until finishing their homework. For Alaric, this kind of studying reminded him of his high school days, making him feel somewhat nostalgic. He had always been a person who could endure studying, and when the content wasn't the somewhat dull high school curriculum, but interesting magic, he wished he could spend all his time on it. Even Hermione felt inferior to this level of enthusiasm. Coupled with his innate talent for learning, Alaric's learning progress soon reached the level of higher grades. However, his learning process was not without obstacles. In his opinion, the writing of technical and academic books in the magical world was quite unreasonable. All the authors wrote quite casually. They would use large sections of gorgeous but useless rhetoric, often interspersed with extensive psychological descriptions and records of their own actions. This made the reader feel like they were not reading a magic book, but the author's autobiographical novel. Moreover, the masters in the magical world were quite arbitrary in their choice of technical terms. In their academic circle, there was no term like scientific name. Most academic terms were based on conventional usage. For the same magic, different authors described it in completely different ways and quite arbitrarily at that, often leaving readers bewildered. They also didn't have terms like professional names or academic language. As a result, Alaric often had to spend a considerable amount of time after reading a book organizing the knowledge, removing 80% of useless rhetoric and stream of consciousness, and comparing with other books to eliminate possible repetitions. Since it was common to find 2 books mentioning the same spell but using different names and descriptions, then he would use more professional and concise words to record his findings. In less than a week since the start of school, he had already filled half of a notebook. He believed that his notes, created by constructing his own system of professional vocabulary and recording it using academic paper style, were more concise and effective than these magical books. He estimated that by the time he achieved his goal of reading all the books in the Ravenclaw Common Room in Hogwarts Library within the 7 years of school, his recorded notes would be enough to encompass the vast majority of the magical world's knowledge. In Alaric's eyes, all the professors at Hogwarts were undoubtedly highly accomplished. Even Severus Snape, with his gloomy and awkward demeanor, was still deserving of being a master in potions. In Alaric's opinion, the only 2 classes he found difficult were History of Magic and Defense Against the Dark Arts. Alaric felt that the History of Magic class was not very useful for him. Remembering the time of the Goblin Rebellions and the establishment of magical laws seemed meaningless. As for the Defense Against the Dark Arts class, Professor Quirrell was not only foolish but also sinister. Alaric couldn't learn anything useful from him. So, whenever these 2 classes came around, he would discreetly skip them and hide in the library. Professor Binns, the History of Magic teacher, was completely unaware of this. The ghost, who had lived for almost 1,000 years, had very limited knowledge of the students. He had never even correctly called a student's name. As for Professor Quirrell, he dared to be angry, but dared not speak. He was a weak-willed person with Voldemort living on the back of his head, making him paranoid and fearful all the time. Apart from studying, other aspects of life at Hogwarts were quite interesting, such as the moving staircases. There were a total of 142 of them. Some were wide and big, others were narrow and shaky. Some changed directions every Friday, and some went only halfway, with a step disappearing suddenly, forcing you to remember where to jump. Moreover, there were many doors that won't open unless you asked them politely or poked them in the right place. Some doors were not real doors at all, just solid walls that looked like doors. Remembering where everything was not easy because everything seemed to be constantly moving. People in the portraits also visited each other constantly, and even suits of armor could walk. For Alaric, experiencing these moving staircases in person was entirely different from watching them in movies or reading about them in books. These supposedly fascinating moving staircases, which were portrayed as interesting in movies and books, brought him a lot of trouble in his daily activities. He felt that anyone with even a slight sense of direction would get lost in Hogwarts. The people in the portraits didn't bother him much, but as a polite person, greeting the portraits frequently became a tiresome task. However, Argus Filch, the caretaker, and his cat Mrs. Norris, who frightened most young wizards in the original work, didn't cause him much trouble. On the one hand, it was because he didn't cause any trouble, and on the other hand, Himari's presence made Mrs. Norris always kept her distance from Alaric. As a cat demon, Himari was like a big sister among all the cats at Hogwarts. All cats, even those with a squib lineage, listened to her. When Alaric was in class or at the library, Himari would sometimes wander around the castle by herself, and no one would harm her. Students liked her, and even the mischievous twins, George and Fred Weasley, respected her. Peeves, who was notorious for pranks, instinctively stayed away from her, probably because she was a cat demon. As a result, people often saw a white cat leading a group of cats of various sizes and colors parading around the castle, becoming a new wonder at Hogwarts. Sometimes, even Oriana would ride on Himari and stroll around with her. Apart from all these, there was one thing at Hogwarts that Alaric paid special attention to. It was something he both looked forward to and felt conflicted about. Broomstick flying. In fact, Alaric was looking forward to Professor Hooch's flying class. After all, flying had been a dream of humanity for a long time. He himself always imagined soaring freely in the sky. Given his current level of magical ability, flying was still an unrealistic dream for him, also because the Harry Potter world itself did not have direct flying magic. But right now, there was a shortcut to achieving this goal: flying broomsticks. For Alaric, flying was cool, but riding a broomstick was too silly. Flying on a surfboard was cool, but riding a flying broomstick was silly. That was his point of view. However, Hermione didn't think so. Perhaps because as a Muggle-born, she had never even tried it, but for Alaric, who had seen it in movies, felt that riding a flying broomstick was a little funny. Since the news of Neville breaking his leg during the flying class had spread to Ravenclaw, Miss Know-It-All became even more nervous about the upcoming flying class. In the library, she borrowed a book called Quidditch Through the Ages and read it carefully several times. In her spare time, she kept muttering some flying guidance from this book and repeatedly asked Cho Chang, who had excellent flying skills, to describe the feeling of riding a broomstick. Even the easygoing Cho Chang was annoyed by her constant questions. Other young wizards were also somewhat uneasy. As the flying class approached, more and more students started discussing flying and Quidditch. Among the new students, those from wizarding families would boast about how they played games on broomsticks during the holidays, and Muggle-born students could only envy them. Merry Christmas, everyone. Wish you all have a great day. Finally, Alaric's first flying class began. In this flying class, Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff students attended together, totaling about 30 to 40 new students. The lesson took place on a flat lawn, with the edge of the lawn leading to the Forbidden Forest. In the distance, black trees swayed in the wind. Before they arrived, the area had neatly arranged about 40 broomsticks. Alaric had heard Cho Chang complain that the broomsticks at Hogwarts were too old, and most of them had some issues. Some shook uncontrollably when flying too high, while others had the bad habit of veering left or right during flight. Soon, their teacher, Professor Hooch, arrived. She had short gray hair and yellow eyes resembling those of an eagle. "All right, what are you all waiting for?" she said sternly. "Everyone stands next to a broomstick. Quickly, quickly, don't waste time." Alaric, in the middle of the line, reluctantly picked up a crooked and twisted old broomstick, its twigs sticking out haphazardly. Hermione stood next to him, curiously holding a broomstick that was almost completely bald, examining it closely. "Stick your right hand and place it above the broomstick handle," Professor Hooch shouted, "then say up." Up, everyone shouted along. Alaric didn't join the shout. He simply muttered it silently in his mind. However, the broomstick obediently moved into his hands. Muttering this kind of simple instruction, which wasn't even considered a spell, was no challenge for him. But for the young wizards, only a very few could do it. Hermione's broomstick just rolled on the ground, and some broomsticks didn't move at all. None of his 3 roommates succeeded. Terry and Anthony's broomsticks got entangled, while Michael's broomstick hit him in the face with its handle. There was chaos for a while before they moved on to the next step. Professor Hooch demonstrated how to mount a broomstick without sliding off. She walked among them, correcting their hand grips. "All right, when I blow the whistle, both legs push off the ground, and you'll leave the ground." "Push hard," Professor Hooch said. She even mentioned Neville as an example. His movements weren't standard, too impatient in pushing off, resulting in losing control and flying into the Forbidden Forest, breaking his wrist. "Hold the broomstick steady, rise a few feet, then lean slightly forward and descend vertically to the ground. Listen to my whistle. 3, 2, 1. The next scene was another mess. Many people hadn't flown half a meter before falling to the ground. Hermione barely managed to stabilize her broomstick and took a minute to hover in the air. Perhaps because Padma Patil was of Indian descent, her broomstick performed dance in the air, and many young wizards looked at her with envy. But Alaric clearly saw her face turning pale, and her hands tightly gripping the broomstick. This acrobatics probably wasn't what she intended. Justin Finch-Fletchley's broomstick kept spinning in place until Justin, dizzy, fell to the ground. Among them, Alaric was the best flyer. He effortlessly flew into the air. What kind of feeling was that? The air rushed through his hair, his robe fluttered behind him, and everyone seemed even smaller in his eyes. Hogwarts gradually looked complete from a bird's eye view. He could hear the sounds coming from the ground, the screams of the girls, the envious shouts of Terry and others. As he continued to ascend and accelerate, even the sounds seemed to be left behind. In fact, with his consistent daily exercise, his body had been steadily evolving and becoming stronger. Now his physical fitness, balance, and reflexes far exceeded human limits, allowing him to control the flying broomstick effortlessly and perform many difficult maneuvers. He was riding the broomstick, shuttling through the Hogwarts sky. He dived through bridge arches, circled around towers several times, and could even do some rolls during the dives. The rapid flight deeply stimulated his nerves, and adrenaline made his blood boil. In the past, he had always been steady and calm. Even in his previous life, he hadn't done anything too outrageous. But now, this kind of flight made him discover another side of himself, an eagerness for excitement, a desire to challenge limits. The feeling of conquering life and death in the midst of danger was irresistible. Maybe I was never a person who could stay put. Yes, perhaps I am not a law-abiding person by nature. Thinking like this, he became more and more bold in his flight. He thought of the aerobatic performances he had seen at air shows. Those pilots operating planes indirectly through controls and dashboards could still complete so many dazzling and exaggerated maneuvers. Now, controlling the flying broomstick himself, with several times the operability and flexibility of a pilot, there was no reason he couldn't perform those maneuvers. Riding the broomstick, he returned to the sky above the lawn. There was enough space there for him to practice aerobatic flying. Of course, there was also a desire to show off, and then he began to try. First, he started with the simplest forward and backward somersaults, followed by rolls to the left and right. Although the rapidly changing gravity caused some congestion in his brain, he still successfully completed these maneuvers. Next were more challenging maneuvers. First the barrel roll, then the half roll, hammerhead turn, cobra maneuver, all difficult and famous maneuvers in aerobatic flying. Despite some bumps and scrapes, Alaric completed these thrilling and flashy maneuvers. If professional flyers had witnessed this scene, they would surely exclaim, "Impossible," and then doubt their life choices. After all, anyone who saw someone else master maneuvers that they might not learn in several years would question their life. Of course, it wasn't just because of his powerful physical abilities and learning skills. The flying broomstick had better control and flexibility than a fighter jet. Seeing this, the young wizards on the lawn uttered exclamations of admiration. Although they couldn't discern the difficulty of these maneuvers, the splendid flight still amazed them. Professor Hooch saw even more. As a former professional Quidditch player, she truly appreciated Alaric's extraordinary flying abilities, talents far beyond any Quidditch player she had ever seen. Finally, Alaric slowed down, concluding the flashy aerobatic flying. It wasn't that he didn't want to continue enjoying the flight, but the creaking of the broomstick lamented to him that it could no longer bear the load. What he had just done was akin to performing aerobatics with a crop duster that had been modified into a fighter jet. He had no doubt that if he continued flying like this, the broomstick would immediately fall apart. Amid the praises of his classmates, Alaric descended slowly, preparing to land. Suddenly, a familiar scream caught his attention. "Help! I can't control it!" The tearful voice immediately drew Alaric's focus. He easily identified the owner of the voice, Hermione. Following the sound, he saw Hermione nervously clutching the broomstick, flying erratically in the sky. It seemed she was about to lose control and fall. "Be careful!" Terrified shouts echoed from the ground. "Hold the broomstick tight, clamp your legs, and try to maintain balance," Professor Hooch reminded loudly. "Alaric, help her!" someone shouted to Alaric. However, at this moment, Alaric was no longer in his original position. He kicked his legs, flying towards Hermione. Unfortunately, Hermione couldn't hold on any longer. The out-of-control flight had exhausted her. When the broomstick once again turned her upside down in the air, she couldn't hold on to the broomstick handle, and she fell from the sky. She let out a terrified scream, helplessly plummeting. The young wizards on the ground couldn't bear to watch. Falling from such a height, even if she didn't die, she would be severely injured. Professor Hooch fumbled for her wand, intending to cast a spell to stop everything, but she wasn't like Dumbledore, proficient in wandless and silent casting. The result was a step too slow. Only Alaric remained calm. He disregarded the broomstick's mournful groans and accelerated his flight recklessly. Under the rapid descent, the howling wind stung his cheeks, and the broomstick's end had completely disintegrated, with twigs continuously being thrown behind him. Now he was almost riding on a broomstick handle that was about to snap in half. At this moment, he, like an arrow shot into the air, crossed a parabola in the sky. Indeed, he was Alaric, calm in the face of danger. His knowledge of physics also came in handy. He controlled the timing of the broomstick's disintegration, allowing it to fall at the same rate as Hermione. Finally, he approached Hermione. His precise calculations meant that at this moment their heights were almost identical, with less than half a meter between them. So Alaric simply released his hands, only relying on his feet to control the broomstick handle, and forcefully caught the panicked Hermione. Although for a moment he felt like his arms had been hit hard, it wasn't as heavy as he had imagined. This was because Alaric had controlled the speed of the descent. He cleverly adjusted the vertical speed to be the same as Hermione's falling speed, so when he caught her, he only had to bear the force in the horizontal direction. However, this led to another problem. Their descent speed was too fast and the current height was too low, so there wasn't enough space for him to decelerate. Nevertheless, all of this didn't make him panic. He remained extremely calm, adjusting his body in midair with all his strength. He forcefully changed the direction of the broomstick, heading towards the nearby forest. With a whoosh, they crashed into the treetop. Alaric tried his best to hold Hermione in his arms. Hard tree branches hit his body, scraping his skin, but the canopy effectively cushioned their falling weight. Unfortunately, their initial falling speed was still too fast. The two of them consecutively passed through several treetops, breaking many branches, before finally hitting the ground and rolling several meters before coming to a stop. Alaric and Hermione fell into the forest together, and Professor Hooch and the young wizards crowded around, creating a chaotic scene. Hermione was the first to be helped up. Her long curly hair was a mess, covered in wood debris. Her face was pale, but she wasn't injured. Alaric, who was taller than her, had shielded her well. Her roommates Lisa Turpin and Parvati Patil rushed forward and hugged her, offering comforting words. However, compared to Hermione, Alaric had a much worse situation. In order to protect Hermione, he had borne the brunt of the damage, whether crashing into the treetops or hitting the ground. The current Alaric was beyond just being described as disheveled. Blood, seeping through his messy black hair, ran down his face. His exposed skin was covered in wounds and scratches, and his hands were completely powerless. The skin beneath his clothes was bruised. In fact, the current state of Alaric was far from simple. He hadn't suffered a major fracture or excessive bleeding, purely accidental. Madame Malkin had crafted a cloak and school uniform for him, using the best materials, expressing her gratitude for his design. The quality was top-notch and enchanted. In the accident, this set of clothing effectively protected him, combined with his superhuman physique, preventing him from breaking his neck. Seeing Alaric's miserable state before Terry and his other roommates could react, the girls around him nervously rushed forward. Regardless of their familiarity with Allaric, they all looked devastated, tense as they helped Allaric up and supported him toward the infirmary. "I'm so envious." Michael watched the retreating crowd and couldn't help but question life. Why couldn't he have such attention from girls? Anthony nodded in agreement. Turns out, being handsome allows you to do anything. Next to them, Hermione finally regained her senses. She struggled to run toward Alaric's direction, managing to squeeze through the crowd to get to his side. Seeing his wretched state, Hermione exclaimed, "Oh," and burst into tears. "It's all your fault. You've made him like this." A Hufflepuff girl nearby accused her. "Guilty as charged," a Ravenclaw girl chimed in. Hermione instantly became the target of everyone's blame. The girls turned their grief over Alaric's injuries into anger towards Hermione. They took turns accusing her. Amidst the anger, jealousy played a bigger role. The girls turned their sorrow over Alaric's injuries into resentment towards Hermione because he had been rescued by their heartthrob. They expressed their feelings through a barrage of accusations. But this time, the usually strong-willed Hermione didn't fight back. She staggered along with the group, escorting Allaric, displaying an attitude of extreme guilt, accepting all the hits and accusations. As for the boys, they were left standing there, looking at each other. Deep envy filled the hearts of everyone. The first flying class for Allaric concluded hastily. After class, a piece of significant news quickly swept through Hogwarts. The heartthrob of the Ravenclaw first-year boys, Allaric, had actually been injured during flying class. This news caused a sensation in Hogwarts. The last person injured in a flying class was Neville Longbottom from Gryffindor. Although it happened just a day ago, it didn't create the same uproar. The door to the infirmary was quickly filled with girls coming to visit Allaric. Madame Pomfrey repeatedly drove them away, but the girls were relentless, with a constant stream of girls wanting to see him. The boys, on the other hand, were caught in a vortex of envy and self-denial. This incident truly revealed the charm of the heartthrob. No one expected Alaric's popularity among girls to be so high, and because of his selfless act of saving someone, his popularity was still rising. In comparison, the other boys seemed completely unattractive, leaving them deeply wounded. Looking at it this way, after Allaric was discharged, he would undoubtedly become the public enemy of the boys. When Allaric woke up, it was already the next morning. He raised his head and saw Hermione leaning on the bedside. The young girl hadn't woken up yet, with red and swollen eyes, evident tear stains near her eyes. It was clear she had cried for a long time last night, and her breath sounded a bit heavier than usual. Next to her, curled up, was Himari, while Oriana was in a dancing pose, standing on the bedside table without moving, pretending to be a real toy. Hearing his movement as he woke up, an elegant girl appeared at his bedside. She was Penelope Clearwater, the Ravenclaw prefect. She held a basket in her hand and calmly approached the bed. From the basket, she took out a jug of milk, a sandwich, a portion of fries, a stack of fried eggs, and a stack of fried fish. All your usual breakfast items. I remembered, so I picked them for you. Check if they suit your taste. Facing Alaric's surprised gaze, she responded, "You were unconscious all night, and you haven't eaten anything. I was afraid you'd be hungry. Also, the fish is for your little cat." She not only remembered his eating habits, but also remembered to feed his cat. Even in the previous life, Alaric had never encountered a girl who cared about him and understood him like this. At that moment, Alaric was truly moved by her gentle smile. Smelling the smell of food, Himari quickly woke up. She licked her owner's face to show intimacy, then sat upright in front of Penelope, looking at her with an expectant expression. Penelope smiled gently at her, poured a plate of milk, and then served the grilled fish. Himari happily started eating. Unlike other cats that gulped down their food, she ate with unusual elegance, sipping the milk and nibbling at the fish, behaving like a true lady. Alaric also started eating breakfast. His eating movements were rougher, having been sent to the infirmary and sleeping most of the day after taking Madame Pomfrey's healing potion. He was thirsty and hungry. Penelope, on the other hand, didn't seem to mind. While he wolfed down his food, she observed him with an appreciative look. Same eating actions. Some people just look uncouth, while others are called genuine. Any judgment about a person varies. After taking a bite of the sandwich, Alaric suddenly thought of something and looked up, asking, "Do you have more breakfast? Hermione probably hasn't eaten yet." Penelope chuckled, teasing, "You really care about your little girlfriend." Seeing Alaric's helpless expression, she explained, "Cho Chang, a second year, is responsible for bringing Miss Granger's breakfast. Speaking of which, both of them seem to care a lot about you." As she finished her words, the door outside sounded with footsteps. A girl carrying a basket pushed the door open and entered the infirmary. Seeing Alaric already awake, drinking milk, the girl revealed a delighted smile. However, she didn't make a sound, just unconsciously quickening her steps. "You finally woke up. We were all worried about you." Cho Chang sat at Alaric's bedside, taking out Hermione's breakfast from the basket as she spoke. "Last night, all the girls at Hogwarts were worried about you." At this point, she frowned slightly, seemingly dissatisfied, but quickly let it go and turned her attention back to him. "Madame Pomfrey gave you a quick recovery potion. She said you'd be fine after just one night. How are you feeling now?" As for Hermione, she hurried to wash up immediately after waking up. Yesterday, she cried for a long time and then slept at the bedside for a night, making herself look messy. She didn't want Alaric to see her unprepared and messy side, of course, relatively speaking. "I'm feeling better than ever now. I could even leave the hospital right away." Alaric stretched lazily, twisted his neck, feeling completely normal. This casual attitude angered Cho Chang. She spoke sternly. "Don't even think about it. Before leaving, you must have a proper checkup with Madame Pomfrey." Alaric was nonchalant about his health, which Cho Chang found hard to tolerate. All right. Alaric shook his head helplessly, but he was secretly pleased. Seeing him looking tired, Cho Chang's tone softened. "Comforting. Your appearance with blood all over last night scared us. We were all worried about you." Hermione cried for a whole night, but her words were immediately interrupted. Hermione, who had just finished washing up, rushed in. Hearing Cho Chang's words, she instinctively raised her voice to refute. "I didn't cry all night." But the next moment, after noticing Alaric beside her, her voice immediately softened. I'm sorry," she stammered an apology to Alaric, lowering her head almost buried into her chest, assuming she had one, making her face completely invisible. "It's all my fault, making you get hurt." Speaking so meekly, this doesn't sound like the usual Hermione. Alaric smiled slightly, teasing, "The Hermione I know is a smart, proud, and stubborn girl. She boldly speaks her mind about anything. I'm neither proud nor stubborn." Hermione couldn't help but raise her head to argue, but when she saw Alaric's face, she involuntarily lowered her head again, stammering, unable to speak. "Never mind, you don't have to be like this. Saving you was my willing choice. We're friends, right?" Alaric patted her head reassuringly. "I couldn't just stand by and watch you fall to the ground. What if you broke something important?" But her tone still seemed on the verge of tears. "But if it weren't for me being reckless, you wouldn't have almost fallen, let alone get hurt." "Is that so?" Alaric was slightly surprised. "But why did you act so recklessly?" "I saw you fly so well, and I thought I could do it too." At this point, she couldn't continue. "Wah!" she cried out. Cho Chang hurriedly fumbled for tissues for her. Indeed, the proud Miss Know-It-All always refuses to lose, whether it's in academics or sports. She always wants to be the best. "But I never thought that in the original work she was not good at flying, but it was not exaggerated like this." According to Alaric's analysis, it was because Hermione, after getting to know him, reluctantly found that he could outshine her in everything. This led to Hermione's determination to surpass him, and it was this determination that made her overcome her fear of flying on broomsticks, resulting in the unexpected accident. At this moment, Penelope, who was not as familiar with Hermione, started comforting her.
"Miss Granger, you have to believe that geniuses do exist in this world." She comforted Hermione while casting a complex look at Allaric. What we laboriously learn, they can grasp at a glance. The magic we practice repeatedly, they can cast after trying it once.
Some people may not accept this. They strive and spare no effort to compete with geniuses. Sometimes hardworking ordinary people can surpass lazy geniuses. The worst situation is when the genius not only learns faster than us, but also works harder than us. In such cases, ordinary people who want to surpass geniuses will only end up with a broken head. However, why compete with geniuses? We should accept the gap in talent and then compare ourselves with people with similar talents. Only then can we avoid undermining our confidence. Being strong only hurts ourselves. In addition, she looked at Alaric with some sadness and added, "People of his level are truly rare. He is a true exception, isn't he?" After hearing her comforting words, Hermione nodded tearfully, feeling relieved. Alaric could only awkwardly scratch his nose. Being praised like this face to face made him feel a bit strange, but he took the opportunity to comfort Hermione. "In fact, we understand your personality, so it doesn't matter how strong you act, but never play with your life when being strong, okay? This time I got injured is just a small matter. At least I still have the chance to save you, but if you have another accident and I'm injured, I won't be able to save you. What would you do then?" In this way, Alaric both comforted and reasoned with Hermione, finally stopping her tears and turning them into laughter. The morning commotion in the infirmary passed like this. However, what followed was the beginning of a helplessly eventful day. After hearing that Alaric had finally awakened, the entrance to the infirmary once again welcomed a queue of visiting girls. Soon, Alaric found himself deep in the crowd of admirers, forcing a stiff smile and entertaining one girl after another. For a while, his bed was filled with various flowers and gifts. Most of the gifts were food, but Penelope and Cho insisted that he shouldn't try them, suspecting that there might be love potions added. Next, Professors Dumbledore and Flitwick also visited him. The former praised Alaric's noble act of sacrificing himself to save others and awarded 20 points to Ravenclaw. After leaving the infirmary, Dumbledore sighed inwardly. The genius I recruited from the Wolves Orphanage this time didn't go down the wrong path. In addition to comforting him, Professor Flitwick expressed that he had a talent for flying and hoped that he would join Ravenclaw's Quidditch team. Alaric was quite interested in Quidditch. In his previous life, he was not that good at sports, so he didn't pay much attention to many sports. But after being reborn, not only did he have powerful magical talents, but he also belonged to the superhuman category in terms of athletic ability, of course not exceeding too much. Firstly, because he was still young. Secondly, because the extraordinary aspects of his strength, speed, and reflexes were not due to innate greatness, but the fact that these abilities had no upper limit and could grow with continuous training. Therefore, he now had a new interest in sports. After all, who wouldn't want to do what they are good at? First of all, in his previous life, he did not participate in any sports activities. The famous plot where one gained the attention of their classmates and the admiration of girls by showing their prowess in football or basketball was something he couldn't relate to as a homebody. Secondly, although his main focus now was on studying magic and getting powerful, he now had the opportunity to show off a bit in front of others during his leisure time. Why not seize the chance? It seems that as he spends more time with these people, he sometimes becomes a little childish. All in all, Alaric was definitely happy to join the Quidditch team, so he readily agreed to Professor Flitwick's request. At the strong recommendation of Cho and Penelope, and for health reasons, Alaric reluctantly stayed in the infirmary for another day, before finally being allowed to be discharged. After Alaric was discharged, Roger Davis, the captain and chaser of the Ravenclaw Quidditch team, immediately approached him and sincerely invited him to join the Quidditch team as a seeker. In Quidditch matches, each team has 7 players, including 3 chasers, 2 beaters, 1 keeper, and 1 seeker. There are 4 balls used in the game, 1 golden snitch, 2 bludgers, and 1 quaffle. The keeper guards the goalposts of their own team, preventing the opposing players from scoring goals. The 3 chasers are responsible for throwing the quaffle into one of the opposing team's goalposts to earn points for their team. The 2 beaters protect their teammates from bludgers and hit bludgers towards the opposing players. The seeker is responsible for searching for the golden snitch in the field, catching it, and ending the game. The team that catches the golden snitch gets an additional 150 points. However, winning the snitch doesn't necessarily mean winning the game, because the point difference between the 2 teams may be greater than 150 points. Usually, the seeker is the key figure on the pitch and the most prominent star. Generally, the player with the lightest body weight and fastest flight becomes the seeker. However, for Alaric, becoming a seeker was not his preference. He felt that being a seeker, where the whole game revolves around searching for one ball, would be quite boring. It was not only monotonous, but also lacked interaction with other players throughout the game. Compared to being a seeker, he would prefer to be a chaser. Among the positions of seeker, chaser, and beater, the chaser in Quidditch was more like a player in football or basketball. Chasers cooperate with each other, scoring goals or preventing the opponents from scoring. Alaric believed that his physical talent not only allowed him to fly fast, but also gave him stronger physical confrontation abilities, enabling him to perform more complex and challenging maneuvers during flight. The Seeker's skills are like Bolt's. They are simply faster. On the football field, Bolt can take the ball and run as quickly as possible, but that's about it. However, to become a real football player, such as Ronaldo or Messi, not only speed is required, but also physical fitness, skills, and other abilities are required. However, for Roger, Alaric's choice was difficult to understand. Generally, the Seeker is the most eye-catching player on the field. On the other hand, being a chaser requires higher ball-handling skills and more complex coordination. Flying ability alone is not enough. In that case, why don't you try my skills in person? After finding that he couldn't persuade Roger, Alaric suggested, let's have a one-on-one match taking turns to attack with the quaffle. The first one to score 5 goals wins. If I win, let me be a chaser, how about it? Then, if you lose, you have to be a Seeker. Agreed. The two made a deal. Ravenclaw Quidditch team's training was on Wednesday. Since Roger believed he had the upper hand, he spread the news of his one-on-one with Allaric in advance. On the day of training, many Ravenclaw students arrived early at the Quidditch pitch, ready to watch. Alaric didn't arrive early. He only left the dormitory 10 minutes before the training time began. His 3 roommates accompanied him. Although most people thought Alaric was a genius, they still believed he wouldn't be Roger's match. However, his roommates had a different view. They were used to Alaric's constantly extraordinary abilities and firmly believed that he wouldn't lose to Roger. On the way, they expressed their envy to Alaric and encouraged him to defeat Roger. When Allaric arrived at the Quidditch pitch, the Ravenclaw players were already there, beginning their training. Since there were very few boys in Ravenclaw, most of the players and substitute players were girls. Alaric saw Cho Chang among them. She was flying on her broomstick, practicing in the air. She flew quite well, and there weren't many players who could match her flying skills. No wonder she could become a Seeker substitute player in her second year. He also saw Hermione sitting excitedly in the stands. She stood up and waved to him as soon as she saw him. Surprisingly, Penelope was sitting beside her. It seemed that they had become friends privately since the incident of Alaric being hospitalized. This was understandable. Both of them were Muggle-born and belonged to the type of academic excellence, so they probably had a lot in common. As soon as Alaric stepped onto the Quidditch pitch, screams and cheers echoed around him. These sounds mostly belonged to the girls who had rushed here to support him, even though they didn't have much faith in Alaric. Nonetheless, they still gave him their utmost support. Despite Alaric's mature nature and his skepticism about the heartthrob treatment, deep down, he couldn't help but feel a bit pleased and touched by their support. He waved to the crowd, and the cheers intensified. On the training ground, Roger walked toward Alaric, carrying 2 broomsticks. He tossed one to Alaric and asked, "Ready? Do you need some time to warm up?" Alaric shook his head, refusing. "No need. Let's start the game now." "All right then. The game begins. I'll let you attack first. Don't say I'm bullying you later," Roger said somewhat proudly as he mounted his broomstick and flew to one side, choosing a goal as his half. The players on the field stopped, and one of them threw the quaffle to Alaric. Alaric caught the ball effortlessly, showing no signs of nervousness. As the players walked by Alaric, they greeted him warmly. When it was Cho Chang's turn, she ran up to Alaric, blushing, and whispered, "Go for it. You'll definitely win." Then she shyly ran off, leaving Alaric slightly moved by her innocent charm. He seriously doubted if he would be able to focus under the continuous temptations of these young witches. Clearing his mind, Alaric held the quaffle and flew to the other goal. After a couple of rounds, he familiarized himself with the unfamiliar broomstick between his legs. Like Roger's broomstick, it was a slightly worn-out Clean Sweep 5, not as fast as the Nimbus 2000, but it excelled in braking systems, ideal for speed and direction control. Soon, Alaric mastered its performance. Then, he nodded to the referee waiting on the sidelines. The referee, another chaser from the team, loudly announced the start of the match. Both players circled their respective goalposts, staring at each other from a distance. To Roger, Alaric seemed too calm, abnormally calm. Roger expected Alaric, a newcomer to the Quidditch pitch, to be nervous like other rookies, exposing vulnerabilities for an easy victory. However, Alaric, holding the quaffle, calmly circled in front of the goal, constantly changing direction and posing for an attack. But the unpredictable, ever-changing trajectory of the broomstick made it impossible for Roger to determine where Alaric would strike from and in which direction, preventing him from making an interception judgment in time. Truly, a bit too much of a genius. Roger thought so, but he still believed he could win easily with experience and skill. However, in the next moment, before he could react, Alaric suddenly accelerated. The previously leisurely circling Alaric turned into a lightning bolt. At a weird angle, he flew toward the goal behind Roger. With Roger's experience, he could anticipate the tremendous pressure Alaric would face during the sudden acceleration and the centrifugal force from rapid turns. These were unbearable for ordinary wizards. He's an excessively talented genius, not only in magic, but also in sports. Thinking this, Roger hastily pulled the broom handle, trying to turn and accelerate to intercept Alaric midway. But it was too late. Roger could only watch as Alaric whizzed past from his upper left, entered his scoring area, and then scored a goal almost at point-blank range. When the player acting as the referee announced this score, even he couldn't believe it. A newcomer who had never played Quidditch before, and on his second time on a broomstick, actually scored ahead against their team captain. Are all new students this strong now? They all questioned their life for a moment. In the audience stands, after a second of silence, all the girls erupted into cheers. Their idol, Alaric, didn't disappoint them. He scored against the captain of the Ravenclaw Quidditch team. With this start, even if Alaric lost in the end, it would be a glorious defeat. This 1 point was enough to prove his ability. Among them, Hermione and Penelope were particularly excited. Even the usually elegant and cool Penelope, at this moment, shouted Alaric's name with a flushed face. Alaric's performance was so stunning that both of them felt a sense of pride. The girls erupted into cheers for Alaric, while on the opposite side, all the boys and other Quidditch players who came to watch fell into stunned silence. They couldn't believe that Alaric, a new student, had managed to score first. Initially, they came here with the expectation of enjoying the spectacle of a genius failing. Little did they know that the reality would be quite the opposite. A genius is a genius. No matter what he is doing, he can make a difference. Now, his popularity among the girls will skyrocket even more, someone envied, muttering. Why is he so excellent at everything he does? Someone else shouted in jealousy. Of course, not everyone shared these sentiments. For example, Alaric's 3 roommates, Anthony Goldstein, Terry Boot, and Michael Corner, were genuinely happy for him, shouting his name proudly amidst the silent boys. Cho Chang, being a reserve player, was equally excited. She immediately shouted joyously when she saw Alaric score, contrasting with the other players around her who were speechless. On the pitch, Allaric leisurely returned to his half. As he passed by Roger, he provocatively asked, "How did I do?" Even someone as composed as him gradually got excited upon stepping onto the pitch, appearing quite aggressive. Roger snorted in dissatisfaction. This time it was just luck. Next, I won't let you score a single point. However, in his heart, Roger remained vigilant, unwilling to relax even a bit. He knew that if Alaric scored again, even if Roger ultimately won, it wouldn't be Alaric losing. But Allaric didn't share the same sentiment, just smiling faintly. The one who won't get another point is you. The final score will be 3-0. He waved, indicating that he was ready. The nearby referee announced the start of the second round. This time, it was Roger's turn to attack. You're too arrogant. Roger, holding the quaffle, charged toward Alaric. I'll show you how a professional player plays Quidditch. His flying speed wasn't particularly fast, but it appeared forceful, directly aiming for Alaric. Alaric saw through it. Roger wanted to use his age, larger physique, and physical advantage to overpower him. Since Alaric appeared younger, less robust, and likely lacked proficiency in physical confrontation in Quidditch, Roger planned to exploit this situation. So in this case, the simplest physical confrontation was the most straightforward and effective strategy. Furthermore, this was in the air, on flying broomsticks. Generally, people who hadn't received special training instinctively tried to avoid a large object flying straight at them rather than colliding head-on. However, Roger underestimated his opponent. Endless growth, potential, and daily training endowed Alaric with unimaginable physical strength. Beneath his seemingly average stature, he concealed a strong and agile muscular physique. Though he didn't boast the muscle mass of a bodybuilder or weightlifter, his muscles resembled those of characters in movies, anime, or games, with supernatural abilities, qualities surpassing ordinary humans. In summary, his average muscle quality could rival Marvel characters like Hawkeye or Black Widow. Although he couldn't match Steve Rogers, surpassing him was only a matter of time, given his unlimited growth potential. As for Roger, he was just a normal wizard in the Harry Potter world. In this magical world, the wizards had magic resistance beyond ordinary people's expectations, but they didn't excel in physical qualities. Moreover, comparing them to superheroes in worlds like Marvel was inappropriate. Although Roger was considered strong for his age, facing Alaric now, it was like hitting a stone with an egg. Faced with Roger charging towards him, attempting to physically overpower him, Alaric's choice was direct confrontation. He flew straight toward Roger, showing no signs of backing down. At first, Roger thought Alaric was bluffing, trying to intimidate him through sheer momentum, forcing him to change direction at the last moment, losing the advantage. He believed that as long as he didn't change direction first, Alaric would urgently veer away before the collision. However, when the two got closer and closer, Roger realized he was wrong. Alaric wasn't bluffing and pretending to confront head-on. He genuinely wasn't backing down. At this moment, Roger had no choice but to grit his teeth and brace himself. After all, as the captain and senior classman, he couldn't afford to lose his momentum. As for the consequences if he accidentally caused a significant accident by colliding head-on with Alaric, he couldn't afford to think about it now. The two collided with each other. In the moment before impact, Roger was still surprised. He never expected his opponent to truly confront him head-on. Alaric seemed like a smart guy who would at least try to avoid the collision by making a sudden turn. He sighed, thinking that he had overestimated Alaric. He also subconsciously turned around, fearing that a head-on collision would cause Alaric to have a big accident. Then, he would be guilty of a serious crime, and no girl in the school would be able to forgive him. At this moment, the female spectators outside the field fell silent. They couldn't believe that Alaric, who was a year younger than Roger and seemingly less sturdy, could stand up to him in a direct confrontation. The outcome of the collision between the two was destined to be tragic. Some girls had already closed their eyes, unable to bear watching any further. Hermione and Penelope turned pale, biting their lips, feeling nervous. No one had high expectations for Alaric. His failure seemed inevitable. However, in the next moment, as the two collided, Roger finally understood why Alaric dared to confront him head-on. Roger's left shoulder collided with Alaric's left shoulder. The collision of bodies, propelled by speed, produced a muffled sound. Bam! Immediately after, Roger felt an overwhelming force attack him on his shoulder, propelling him and his broomstick far away. In the next moment, a sensation of pain engulfed him. His vision flashed with stars, and his body felt as if it were about to fall apart. He couldn't hold on to the quaffle anymore, and under this impact, the quaffle flew far away. At that moment, he felt like he had collided not with Alaric, who was even thinner than him, but with a solid wall. He recalled the scene when some foolish muggles, upon discovering wizards passing through walls at platform 9A Cern, curious and attempting to imitate, ended up crashing into the wall. Back then, he thought those muggles were both stupid and ridiculous. But now, he felt that, at this moment, he was no different from those muggles. He began to be grateful for choosing to turn sideways, avoiding a direct impact. If he had collided head-on, he might have been knocked off the broomstick. That would have been a bigger humiliation. Now, just being only knocked away was the best outcome. With great effort, he stabilized the broomstick through sheer determination, avoiding a bigger accident during the game. However, by this point, the quaffle had already been taken by Alaric, who had won. In other words, this round ended with his failed attack. After a good while, the referee on the sidelines announced the score, looking dumbfounded. Outside the field, the spectators were in an uproar. For Alaric himself, the outcome after the direct confrontation was expected. However, for the onlookers, it was completely unexpected. Including the girls supporting Alaric, everyone found it hard to believe their eyes. Who could believe that the seemingly weak-looking Alaric actually sent the tall Roger flying away, seemingly effortlessly, as if the opponent hadn't used any force at all? Was there a giant hiding under that exquisite cloak? Subsequently, the girls erupted into even louder cheers. Their crush had such hidden strength, especially some senior girls found Alaric irresistible. Hermione and Penelope hugged each other. Whether it was for Alaric's victory or his unharmed state, they were happy that he was safe and sound. And not everyone in the Ravenclaw team was silent because of Roger's failure. Ravenclaw's Quidditch team was predominantly composed of girls. When Roger failed for the first time, they hesitated due to personal relationships, reluctant to show excessive excitement. However, when Alaric defeated their captain again, all the female players couldn't help but cheer loudly, joining Cho Chang in supporting Alaric. Their genius, their crush, was indeed powerful. After the second round of the showdown, no one believed that Roger could secure a victory easily. As a newcomer, Alaric not only possessed outstanding flying talent, but also impressive physical strength. In the eyes of the Ravenclaw players with his physical strength, Alaric was already competent enough to confront Slytherin's Flint on the pitch, and he wouldn't be suppressed by his foul tactics. Then, facing such a talented player, their only advantage was their Quidditch skills and several more years of playing experience. In terms of the talent and strength, Alaric was better, and if he can use this to his advantage, he may still win against Slytherin. Therefore, Alaric's advantage, combined with his talent, gave him a chance to win in the end. Even the boys put aside their jealousy of Alaric and spontaneously started cheering for him. When two people's scores were close, the one behind would envy the one ahead. However, when the gap was large enough, the one behind would only be left with admiration. That's how human psychology works. People would naturally choose to support the underdog. Although their cheering was still a bit sparse, it proved that Allaric, with his performance just now, had earned their approval. At least no one dared to sarcastically call Alaric a pretty boy or accuse him of being sissy anymore. Of course, this might also be because they feared Alaric's strength, afraid of receiving a beating from him. On the field, Roger finally recovered from the feeling of being powerless all over, gradually regaining his ability to move. He nodded to the referee, indicating that he was unharmed. So, the next round of the match began. This time, it was Alaric's turn to attack with the quaffle. By now, Roger was thoroughly nervous. He stared at his opponent's movements, not daring to be careless. Because his opponent surpassed him in both flying speed and strength, he had to fully utilize his own skills to compete. "Come at me," he shouted at Allaric, also boosting his own morale. You have no chance. I'm going to show you the real Quidditch skills. This time, Alaric didn't say anything. He genuinely didn't want to exchange trash talk with Roger anymore because he knew Roger was going to lose again. Even in a skill-based competition, Roger might not be able to surpass him. After all, Alaric could perform acrobatic flying maneuvers. With these maneuvers, he could offset Roger's flying skills. Combined with his knowledge of football and basketball techniques, placed in Quidditch, he will be able to outperform Roger. And these techniques, he summarized himself, were absolutely unheard of by Roger. His experience was useless in this situation. In this way, he decided not to use his superhuman strength or speed this time, but to defeat Roger through skills. Defeating him in what he was best at. That was the kind of resolve Alaric chose. After making up his mind, Alaric, holding the quaffle in one hand, didn't waste time on probing and went straight into action. His initial strategy was the same as Roger's in the previous round, directing his flight towards the opponent. It seemed like he wanted to rely on his physical prowess to overpower Roger, replicating the success of the previous round. However, unlike before, this time he didn't fly too fast. At this speed, whether he chose to make a sudden change in direction or perform high-difficulty maneuvers, it was much easier than at higher speeds. However, from Roger's perspective, facing an opponent at this speed allowed him to make judgments on whether to dodge or let Alaric pass, and then catch up. At this speed, Alaric couldn't fully utilize his speed and strength advantages. Seeing this situation, Roger was overjoyed. He sighed inwardly, thinking that young people couldn't handle provocation. With just a sarcastic remark from him, Allaric immediately abandoned his advantage and decided to compete in skills. This time, Roger was definitely going to win. So he began to carefully observe Alaric's movements, ready to react at any moment. Seeing this situation, the Quidditch players and knowledgeable spectators around couldn't help but sigh. It was a pity that Alaric gave up his advantage and wasted his skills. As the distance between the two continued to close, everyone's hearts were in their throats. As they watched the distance between the two shrink to just a few meters, Alaric finally made a move. He pulled the broomstick to the left, attempting to pass the opponent with a sudden change in direction and go around Roger before he could react. However, the experienced Roger was well prepared. From the moment Alaric prepared for the change in direction and turned his waist, Roger accurately predicted his next move. So he immediately responded, turning right decisively. His movements were swift, even faster than Alaric himself. That way, he had the initiative in his hands. As for the next step, whether he chose to block Alaric's flight path or cut in from the side when Alaric flew past to snatch the quaffle, it depended on Alaric's next decision. This goal was his. Roger felt secretly happy and a long-lost smile appeared on his face. But in the next moment, he realized he was wrong. Alaric's change in direction was just a feint. His left turn was only halfway executed when he unexpectedly violated the common sense of the human body, forcefully twisting in the opposite direction, turning the broomstick from a left turn to a right turn in a short period. But facing this move, Roger didn't react, or rather his reflexes and physical abilities didn't allow him to react. So he was deceived by this feint and could only watch as his opponent passed by him. When he could turn around and chase, it was already too late. With ease, Allaric once again threw the ball into the goal. Tusro. Screams immediately echoed throughout the stadium. Everyone felt that their perspectives had been completely overturned by Alaric this morning. Alaric, this man, recognized as the heartthrob of Hogwarts girls, time and time again challenged their common sense. Everyone's impression of him went from an underestimated newcomer to a really talented guy with an exceptional speed, then to a player with strong physical strength, and now he defeated Roger, the captain of the Ravenclaw Quidditch team, on a skill level. Can one person's talent be this strong? But no matter what, whether male or female, whether ordinary spectators or Quidditch players, everyone cheered for Alaric.
They felt that they had witnessed the rise of a legend.
These Ravenclaw wizards were already looking forward to the upcoming Quidditch Cup. Ravenclaw has not won the Quidditch Cup at Hogwarts for several years in a row. They believe that with Alaric in the team, everything will change. As for Roger, he had lost confidence in himself after being repeatedly defeated by Alaric. Originally, he just wanted to educate the newcomer, but instead, the newcomer educated him comprehensively. In terms of speed, physical strength, or skills, he was inferior, making him wonder if he was dreaming right now. He really wanted to be woken up by his roommates immediately, but unfortunately, this was reality. But Roger, being the captain of the team, quickly regained his confidence, preparing to use his own skills to score in the next play and save the game. After all, compared to offense, defense requires higher expertise. Apparently, Alaric was completely new in this regard, providing him an opportunity. However, his good idea was met with cruel reality. In the next round, facing Roger's attack, Alaric appeared remarkably mature and experienced. He didn't rush to intercept Roger directly or engage in flashy pursuits. When Roger skillfully broke through his defense from an unexpected angle, Alaric remained calm. As Roger passed by him from the blind spot, he quickly made a 180-degree turn with the broomstick, then, leveraging his speed advantage, caught up with Roger from behind and overtook him. Simultaneously, he casually caught the quaffle with a light swing of his arm. This move once again stirred applause and cheers from the audience, but it was not as enthusiastic as the last time, not because his performance was subpar, but because everyone was numb to his extraordinary displays. In the next round, it was Alaric's turn to attack. This time, he changed his strategy again. Facing Roger's tight defense, he didn't even consider breaking through. Instead, he shot the ball from a distance. Under his powerful arm, the quaffle flew like an arrow released from the bow. Roger could only watch helplessly as the ball soared over his head, drawing a beautiful arc and precisely entering the goal. This time, Alaric didn't even enter the scoring zone. Such shooting skills left the young wizards in awe. The referee timely announced the score. 3-3. Roger gloomily fell to the ground, forced to face his own failure. He approached Alaric and shook hands with him. "You are the new future of our Quidditch team. I guess it's your era from now on." He left the field with a dejected figure, leaving a sad silhouette for everyone. It seemed like it would take him some time to recover from this. Meanwhile, Alaric found himself surrounded by female teammates and Ravenclaw girls. Cho Chang was the closest to him. She excitedly hugged and jumped around him. She couldn't help but leave a soft kiss on his face. All the Ravenclaws present believed that the era of Ravenclaw dominating the Quidditch Cup was about to begin. In this way, Alaric became the Ravenclaw chaser. Originally, the team was planning to recruit a chaser from the third-year students to replace the senior students leaving the team, but the spot went to Alaric. After Alaric promised to help Cho Chang and train her flying skills, another senior seeker left the team without worries, focusing on preparing for OWL. Cho Chang became the official seeker, which was a year ahead of schedule in the original story. On the day Alaric defeated Roger with a score of 3 points, becoming the Ravenclaw chaser, the news quickly spread throughout Hogwarts. Most people initially didn't believe it when they heard the news. But there were many young wizards who witnessed the situation on site, and their vivid descriptions made it hard for others not to believe. With this, Alaric's fame expanded beyond the image of a handsome guy. Achievements in academics, appearance, and sports were the 3 aspects students cared about the most. If someone excelled in one of these areas, they would be welcomed and admired by their peers. However, Alaric was more than that. He excelled in all 3 aspects, making him the object of admiration for most students. His fans began to include not only girls, but also many boys, who expressed admiration and idolization. Of course, Alaric wasn't Gilderoy Lockhart, unable to make everyone like him. Some boys and some wizards who believed in pureblood supremacy were not fond of him. Most of these individuals were from Slytherin house. Draco Malfoy was a typical example among them. He had more than once boasted in front of others, claiming that Alaric was just a dirty mudblood who knew nothing but to show off. This time, when Malfoy heard that Alaric defeated Roger, successfully becoming the chaser in his first year, his jealousy was so thick that it could be cut with a knife. Even the news of Harry becoming a seeker did not make him feel so jealous. He claimed that Alaric must have bribed Roger, deceived all of Ravenclaw, and said this was entirely biased. Rumors had it that Malfoy threw a tantrum in the common room, then wrote several long letters home. Of course, just mention the recent news, that is, the famous savior, Harry Potter, was admitted to Gryffindor as a seeker. But with Alaric's brilliance, this news did not cause much of a stir in other houses. Only the wizards of Gryffindor were happy for him. However, on the second day of this news, the joy of these wizards turned into anger. Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, and Neville Longbottom, during a night out, were caught by Filch, and each of them deducted 10 points from Gryffindor house. During breakfast, Alaric could hear the Weasley brothers arguing loudly, even several rows away. George and Fred kept praising the 3 of them for their cool actions, saying they were awesome and asking Harry why he didn't bring them along. But Percy was furious with Ron, threatening to report everything to their mother. On the Slytherin side, Malfoy and his 2 cronies laughed together, looking like they had successfully executed a scheme. Alaric knew why. In the original story, Malfoy invited Harry and him to have a wizard duel at midnight in the trophy room. But it was just a trap. Harry and Ron believed him and went to find him at midnight, but they almost got caught by Filch. However, unlike now, in the original book, Hermione followed them, due to which they were able to escape that time. But now, perhaps due to the butterfly effect caused by Hermione being sorted into Ravenclaw this time, Harry couldn't escape Filch this time. Alaric was adding meat sauce to the fried noodles when Anthony nudged him. Anthony whispered in his ear, "Hey, great guy, have you heard? The 3 of them went to explore the forbidden corridor on the 3rd floor last night. So daring. When should we sneak a peek too?" Before Alaric could respond, Hermione interjected, "I heard it, Anthony. How could you encourage him to do such things? It could cost us house points." "Oh, Hermione, can't you lighten up a bit?" Terry Boot, sitting beside them, sounded a bit exasperated. They all agreed that Hermione was great in everything, but too serious, too fond of meddling in others' business. "Yeah, Alaric, please take care of your girlfriend," Michael Corner chimed in. I'm not his girlfriend, Hermione retorted, her face turning slightly red. However, her voice was a bit soft, and her gaze shifted uncertainly towards Alaric, evidently lacking confidence. All right, Hermione, everyone is just discussing it. Don't take it so seriously. Alaric put down the fork in his hand, soothingly patting the girl's thick, long hair. He had become quite skilled at this action. Hermione calmly fell silent, a somewhat strange situation to Alaric. Since the incident in the flying class, this has happened several times. Every time, Alaric easily comforted the angry Hermione. However, in the past, Hermione would argue with him each time until he left her speechless. Meanwhile, Cho Chang smoothly changed the topic of discussion. Do any of you know what's inside that corridor? I've heard many senior students secretly exploring it, but they never tell me what they find. There's a three-headed dog inside, Penelope, sitting across from Alaric, answered the question. Now, she was also a member of this little group, often staying with Alaric, Hermione, and Cho Chang. I tried sneaking into that corridor for an adventure before. I was blocked by a three-headed dog. The big dog is much taller than me and looks fierce, showing its teeth. Although it mostly sleeps soundly, one head is always awake. By the way, I found a trapdoor on the floor where the three-headed dog lies. I think the secret is behind that trapdoor. Then she lowered her voice and whispered, I heard that over the summer vacation, Dumbledore gathered Professor McGonagall, Professor Flitwick, Professor Sprout, Professor Snape, Professor Quirrell, and Hagrid to create a challenge in that corridor. Each person designed a level. Is that true? Why would they do that? Hermione sounded incredulous. I guess there's definitely something they don't want others to get hold of, Cho Chang confidently said. Otherwise, they wouldn't go to such lengths to set up obstacles with stages. I think so too. That's what I think. Others expressed their agreement. But as a reincarnator, Alaric had a different opinion. I actually think Dumbledore deliberately set up a trap, he explained. If Dumbledore wanted to hide something, he could easily do it alone in a place only he knows. But now, Dumbledore's choice is to put something in that corridor, explicitly telling everyone not to enter. Obviously, he's telling others. There's a secret here. And the news that Dumbledore invited the professors to build stages has already spread, further confirming this conclusion. Dumbledore himself doesn't seem to want to hide that secret. He might even want everyone to know what's hidden there. At this point, he paused deliberately. Around him, 3 girls and 3 roommates all cast their expectant and approving glances at him. So he continued, and the purpose of the stages is to test us. Dumbledore hopes that students can pass these stages to undergo a practical assessment. Another possibility is that these stages are for catching thieves. Someone wants to steal something from Dumbledore, and the professors set up these stages as traps. They use what the thief wants to steal as bait in the trap. The thief probably thinks these stages are Dumbledore's anti-theft measures, but in reality, the stages are just a disguise. The ultimate goal is to attract the thief's attention and make the thief believe that what he wants to steal is hidden there. Everyone believes that the more precious something is, the better it is protected. If the thief really breaks into the stages, he falls into the trap because Dumbledore wants to lure him out. Alaric's analysis made everyone suddenly realize, although they were still somewhat skeptical about Dumbledore arranging conspiracy traps, they mostly believed Alaric's explanation. However, the idea of a test for students caught their attention. The 3 roommates huddled together for a while, then turned to Allaric and said that the 3 of them were planning to challenge the corridor together. We won't bring you along, Anthony explained to Alaric. Your strength is too strong. With you around, we can solve any trouble. What use do we have then? Hearing this, Hermione sharply ridiculed them. If you want to show off your abilities, don't copy Alaric's homework every day. This hit them right where it hurt. They mumbled for a long time before finally coming up with excuses like there's too much homework and wizards don't consider it copying. After that, Anthony, Terry, and Michael left with their plates, looking somewhat embarrassed. After a while, Hermione suddenly whispered to Alaric, How about we also find some time to check out that corridor? I also want to try Dumbledore's test. Indeed, Hermione became significantly more sensitive when it came to exams and tests, striving to be the first. Alaric readily agreed, because he was genuinely interested in the magical stone hidden behind the magic mirror. Then, they invited Penelope and Cho Chang to join them. Penelope expressed interest and agreed to accompany them again, but Cho Chang declined. I hate those scary magical creatures, she explained. Just thinking about that 3-headed dog with its slobbering mouths terrifies me, so don't count me in. When it came to deciding the time to act, Alaric suggested another idea. Maybe we don't need to rush into exploring. Firstly, we don't even know what else is in that corridor besides the 3-headed dog. I think we should first find a way to deal with the 3-headed dog, and then make plans. Which means we should go to the library and look up the habits of 3-headed dogs. I remember there's a book called The Monster Book of Monsters that records many dangerous magical creatures. It might mention this one, Hermione analyzed. Alaric nodded in agreement, but he added, Actually, there's a more direct way. We could find the designer of this challenge and get more clues from them. From the professors Penelope mentioned, who do you think would use a 3-headed dog as a challenge? After a brief silence, they all gave the same answer. Hagrid. The three girls suddenly realized and immediately showered Alaric with admiring glances. "You're really clever." To think of looking at the problem from this angle. Alaric modestly waved his hand, then proposed, "For now, let's stay put. On one hand, we can check the habits of three-headed dogs in the library, and on the other hand, we can find an opportunity to ask Hagrid." In fact, Alaric believed that he now had the ability to break through to the end of the challenge alone. He had read the original book and knew what each stage of the challenge was. The first stage with the three-headed dog could be handled by Hamari. Although she couldn't transform into human form yet, she could already fight with her magical power. While facing a dragon, she might be a bit stretched, but defeating a three-headed dog was well within her capabilities. The second stage with the devil's snare could be dispersed with flames, and he knew how to use the fire-making spell. The third stage, catching a flying key while riding a broomstick, was his strength. The fourth stage, the giant wizard's chess. He might not know how to play the game yet, but with his intelligence, he should pick it up quickly. The fifth stage, testing logical reasoning. While most ordinary students would be stumped, he could easily solve Snape's puzzle with his intellect. But he didn't want to break through all the stages now, because the last stage was the Mirror of Erist, and the Philosopher's Stone was hidden inside it. This magical mirror could reflect the deepest desires of people, and only those who wanted to find the stone, but not use it, could retrieve the stone from the mirror. And this was something Alaric couldn't do. He did want to use the Philosopher's Stone. Of course, he did want to achieve immortality, but he didn't want to use the Philosopher's Stone for it. The immortality achieved through the Philosopher's Stone had significant flaws. The user had to drink the potion created by the Philosopher's Stone every week to maintain immortality. And this kind of immortality could only keep a person alive, but couldn't ensure youthful vitality. Nicholas Flamel and his wife were examples. Although they lived for several hundred years, most of the time, they had the appearance of elderly people. Moreover, Alaric believed that, with his ability, he would definitely find a more perfect way to achieve immortality. Even if he couldn't do it himself, he could achieve it through summoning or by going to different worlds in the future. After all, in countless dimensions, there must be some dimensions where there were ready-made methods for achieving immortality. Alaric was merely curious about the Philosopher's Stone and wanted to experiment with it to uncover its secrets. Unfortunately, with his current level of magical skills, he didn't have the ability to crack the Mirror of Erist, at least not yet. Additionally, even if he could obtain the Philosopher's Stone, he didn't want Dumbledore to discover that it was taken by him. Until he became invincible, attracting Dumbledore's attention wouldn't be a good idea. Therefore, he could only take advantage of the confusion and bring the Philosopher's Stone with him. The best opportunity would be at the end of the semester, precisely when Harry Potter and Voldemort were vying for the Philosopher's Stone. Since the plot had already been changed, Hermione was no longer a member of the trio. Hence, he couldn't guarantee that Harry would smoothly reach the final stage and face Voldemort. To prevent any unexpected situations, Alaric decided to delay the exploration until the end of the semester. This way, they would coincide with Harry, or at least follow closely behind him. If Alaric, Hermione, and Penelope's strategy team entered the stages before Harry and Voldemort, Alaric's abilities would easily allow him to pass all the stages and reach the Mirror of Erist. However, if they did that, the premature exposure of the stages might prompt Dumbledore to reset them, drastically changing the plot. In that case, the opportunity to obtain the Philosopher's Stone through subterfuge would be greatly diminished. That was the plan. So at the moment, there were two things Alaric needed to do. First, he had to learn how to play wizard chess, and second, he needed to get a better broomstick. This wasn't only for this quest, but also for future travels and Quidditch matches. During his recent duel with Roger, Alaric had noticed the shortcomings of the Clean Sweep 5. It not only fell short in speed and maneuverability, but the quality was also lacking. Whenever Alaric wanted to exert forceful control or perform extreme maneuvers, he felt that the broomstick had reached its limit and could disintegrate at any moment. This prevented him from fully unleashing his abilities. Of course, if Roger knew about this, he might be so discouraged that he would give up on Quidditch altogether. Regarding broomsticks, Alaric had his own ideas. He planned to handcraft a suitable broomstick for himself rather than buying a ready-made one. In this world, broomsticks were made from ordinary wood, although these woods inherently possessed some magical properties. However, overall, they were still too ordinary. This applied to wands as well. But in terms of materials, Alaric also had his advantages. He could perform a cross-dimensional summoning once a month, and while most of the time he got nothing, occasionally he summoned some good stuff. This included various rare materials. Long ago, he had summoned a twig from the mother tree of Aviana, where the three world trees, Nordrassil, Teldrassil, and Vordrassil grew. Nordrassil had been sealed by the magical power of the guardian dragon to prevent Illidan from creating a new well of eternity, becoming the mother tree of the night elves. Teldrassil was another major dwelling place for night elves, with their capital city Darnassus situated within its branches. Vordrassil, located in Northrend, was intended to be the first world tree for night elves, but due to its roots reaching too deep, even into the lair of the old god Yogg-Saron, it caused the release of Yogg-Saron's power, leading to its destruction. The mother tree, being the mother of the world trees, contained powerful magic. This twig, being Aviana's favorite and most frequently inhabited twig, possessed significant magical power. A wand made from it would undoubtedly surpass all wands in this world, including the Elder Wand. However, Alaric didn't want others to know about the existence of this twig, so he temporarily stored it until he learned how to make wands. Apart from this, Alaric had obtained other materials, such as the long horn of Tiamat and the golden fleece, which were legendary items in mythologies, but had the same origin. Alaric could sense that these two materials came from the same world, the Type Moon universe. A few days ago, during the summoning day, he luckily summoned twigs from two mythical trees. Leaving aside the formidable properties of these materials, they also symbolize nature, which was quite important in magic. In terms of broomstick crafting, a broomstick made from these woods might even surpass the flying speed of the fastest broomstick. However, before creating his own broomstick, Alaric needed to find a laboratory and buy a few broomsticks to dissect and study. In fact, there was a perfect place for Alaric's laboratory at Hogwarts, the Room of Requirement. The Room of Requirement was located on the 7th floor of Hogwarts Castle, opposite the tapestry depicting the giant wielding a club to bludgeon Sir Cadogan. The method to enter this room was extraordinary. The user had to concentrate on the desired location, walk 3 times in front of that section of the wall, and a smooth door would appear on the wall. Only through this door could one enter the Room of Requirement. Alaric had personally tried the Room of Requirement before. According to his understanding, this room wasn't essentially a single room, but comprised many different subspaces. Originally chaotic, these subspaces were shaped into various distinct rooms through the magic of the Room of Requirement, based on the user's imagination. The largest subspace within the Room of Requirement was a junkyard. It accumulated everything that Hogwarts staff and students had vanished, using the vanishing spell. According to the original work, one of Voldemort's Horcruxes, Ravenclaw's diadem, was also hidden within. When a user imagined the desired location, the magic of the Room of Requirement would screen among the shaped rooms, connecting the door with the room that best matched the conditions. When none of the shaped rooms met the requirements, the magic would shape an unstructured subspace into a room that fit the criteria. Looking at it this way, it wasn't a true Room of Requirement, since the number of these chaotic subspaces, the prototypes, was finite. Once all these subspaces were exhausted, the Room of Requirement wouldn't create new rooms, and future users wouldn't be able to make requests that required a new room. Nevertheless, the magic of the Room of Requirement was indeed astonishing. Even the phase-overlapping magic of Platform 98 Seern couldn't match it in terms of complexity. This was a compound magic involving spatial manipulation, telepathy, and quasi-creation. Although Alaric had only reached the 2nd year in magical studies, he could judge that it was impossible to create a Room of Requirement solely with modern spells. It undoubtedly involved more complex and fundamental magic. To master this kind of magic, one had to study ancient runes, and then further research spells and ancient magic. Therefore, Alaric's immediate task was to study ancient runes thoroughly. This would enable him to master the alchemy required to make his own broomstick. Additionally, he needed to find a way to earn enough galleons to buy broomsticks for research in Diagon Alley. However, none of these tasks could be accomplished at the moment. As for galleons, he could earn them after returning to the Muggle world, and by using magic and his knowledge from his previous life, he could earn enough pounds exchanged for galleons. Furthermore, he could only visit Diagon Alley after leaving Hogwarts. Considering this, everything had to be postponed until after the Christmas break. Currently, Alaric had to devote himself to studying the thick book, Advanced Runic Translation. He had already finished the basic introduction to ancient runes, and with further progress, he could start practical alchemical experiments. In Alaric's eyes, the study of ancient runes was a subject that integrated knowledge from linguistics, theology, philosophy, history, folklore, and programming. Although the meaning and combination of runes had some logical connections, it mostly involved many images from mythical history. These images were what made magic different from science. In this world, the essence of magic came from different places. Wizards and magical creatures were distinguished from ordinary beings by their inherent magical power. The existence of magical power allowed them to exert influences on the material world in a manner that contradicted scientific and logical models. Due to the differences in magical power, animagus like animagus couldn't transform into magical creatures. An animagus transformed their body into the body of an animal through transfiguration, involving changing one form of matter into another through magical power. However, while magical power could transform matter, it was challenging to transform magical power itself. Including wizards, magical creatures had different amounts of magical power. Thus, when an animagus like animagus attempted to transform into a magical creature, the transfiguration spell could only turn the wizard's body into the body of the magical creature. However, the magical power of the wizard couldn't be transformed into the magical power of the magical creature. This mismatch between magical power and physical body caused the transfiguration to fail. In summary, magical power followed certain unique rules to influence the material world. These rules, when abstracted by wizards, became ancient runes.
This was analogous to computer programming languages. Machine language at the lowest level was akin to the rules of the world.
While machine language could be directly used to write programs, it was too complex for practical use. Therefore, someone or something processed machine language into instructions using a processor. Through these instructions, machine language was simplified into assembly language, which was the set of rules equivalent to magic. This set of rules could be used through magical power. However, for magical creatures, the rules of magic were still too complex for them to comprehend. Therefore, they could only crudely utilize magical power. Just as assembly language was further turned into programming languages through additional instructions, these magical rules were further simplified into ancient runes by some predecessors. It is widely known that even in an age where everyone uses computers, only professional programmers understand programming languages. Ancient runes are somewhat similar in the wizarding world. Only a small number of wizards can comprehend the principles of ancient runes, and other wizards are unable to learn complex ancient runes, let alone cast spells using them. However, even for genius wizards who have mastered ancient runes, casting spells using them is a very cumbersome task. Just as even the most skilled programmer cannot send an email using a computer without any applications, they must spend time writing the corresponding program. Therefore, wizards proficient in ancient runes further combine and simplify them into spells, similar to how programmers write and package code. Ordinary people only need to click with a mouse to use a program, and ordinary wizards only need to recite an incantation as required to use magic. Ordinary spells are like packaged programs that cannot be further edited or combined. However, by mastering ancient runes, one can become a programmer among wizards, understand the principles of spells, and even create magical items or invent new spells. Through research, Alaric has discovered the essence of magic to some extent. Assuming that the original physical rules of the universe are materialistic and follow logic, then magical rules are subjective and anti-logical. The difference between the two lies in whether there is purpose. Magic has purpose, but physical rules do not. Whether there is purpose is the difference between subjective and objective. This is similar to a spell like Lumos, which from the perspective of physical rules is just a combination of sound waves or ink molecules. Its difference from spells like Illusion Formation or Shadowless Divine Edge lies only in the arrangement. However, in a subject with purpose, such as literature, the difference in meaning between these words is not just in spelling, but in the subjective meanings bestowed by people. The same applies to magic. The meanings of these spells are subjective, given by magical rules. So, when the rules themselves are subjective and purposeful, it can prove that either these rules are established by people rather than naturally formed, or it can demonstrate that the system in which these rules exist, the world itself, is not materialistic, but idealistic. The control variables of physical rules do not always work in magic. Having said so much, it mainly expresses Alaric's understanding of magic in the Harry Potter world, and reveals his plans for the future. His plan is to master the principles of magic through research, then grasp the true laws. This is Alaric's plan for the path of becoming powerful. He has the talent for unlimited progress, unlimited strength, the ability over time and space, and a powerful learning ability. Originally, he could have specialized in physical skills. Because he can progress infinitely, if he focuses on this, he can become a warrior or physical adept like Saitama or the protagonists in Dragon Ball. He could also continuously explore his temporal and spatial talents, specialize in both, follow the superpower path, and eventually become a powerhouse capable of mastering the laws of time and space. However, driven by his interests and curiosity, Alaric chose the path of a mage, the most challenging path. Mages are not like warriors, who engage in straightforward, exhilarating battles that don't require much thought. A mage's battles are all about calculations, and a mage's strength comes from knowledge. Mages are not like superpowered individuals who manipulate elements, modify matter, and control spirits, effortlessly using their abilities. If superpowered individuals use a mouse controller or touchscreen to manipulate reality, mages use code and keyboards, transforming the world in the most complex way. But mages are also the most powerful because they are researchers. Only mages can understand the true nature of the world, browse the texture of rules. Mages are also creators. Although mages, like warriors and superpowered individuals, can cause destruction, only mages can truly create. They study the rules and use them to reshape the world. In his past life, whether reading novels, comics, or playing games, Alaric's favorite characters were always mages, and he looked down on warriors, priests, and others. The former were brainless barbarians who could only cause destruction and were unable to create value, while the latter were the lackeys of gods, unthinking believers relying on gifts from others. And in this life, he finally became almost a true mage and already possesses the talent to become the strongest mage. What hinders a mage's progress is never magical power, but intelligence. Human learning and memory abilities have limits, and this limit is the biggest shackle restricting a mage's progress. The more knowledge one acquires, the more time one needs for review, and the slower the progress. Because of this, mages have to choose specialization, just like ordinary people can only choose one major in university. those who choose minors and double majors are all top students. Even in the magic-abundant D&D world, the greatest human arcanist in the Taural world, the founder of the Netheril Empire, Ilom, eventually transformed himself into an Elder Brain Lich. But Alaric is different. His learning ability and talent for unlimited progress allow him to study and explore extensively without constraints. In the end, he believes that he can completely master the rules of the world through research on various types of magic. By then, he will be able to surpass everything purely with intelligence. While Alaric was diligently studying ancient runes to make his own flying broom, news arrived from Gryffindor. Harry Potter got a Nimbus 2000 flying broomstick. This broomstick was the latest product from the renowned broomstick company in Europe, Nimbus Racing Broom Company, representing the pinnacle of flying broomstick technology. Currently, the mainstream broomsticks used by the Quidditch teams of the 4 houses at Hogwarts were the old-style Clean Sweep 5, with only a few individuals able to use the Clean Sweep 6. However, even the Clean Sweep 6 couldn't match the performance of the Nimbus 2000. Upon hearing this news, Roger came to talk to Alaric once, suggesting crowdfunding within the house to buy a Nimbus 2000 for him. Still, Alaric declined. Quidditch isn't just a sport that relies solely on broomstick performance, Alaric said disdainfully. Even if you give me a Comet 2060, I can defeat any opponent. While he said that, in reality, he just thought buying a Nimbus 2000 was too wasteful. He would finish making his own broomstick within this semester, and the Nimbus 2000 he bought now would just gather dust later. Unbeknownst to Alaric, he had already spent 2 months at Hogwarts. 2 months of studying and living in the castle, getting along with friends, especially Hermione, Cho Chang, and Penelope, made him increasingly regard Hogwarts as a home. In the first 10 years of this life, although life in the Wolves' Orphanage was not bad, the emptiness of being disconnected from his past life and the loneliness of living among young children made him always feel out of place in this world. It wasn't until that day when he met Dumbledore, learned about the truth of the world, and then came to Hogwarts. This world, along with familiar faces like Hermione, Harry, and Cho Chang, finally made him feel a greater passion for life and a subtle warmth. Although deep down, he still sometimes thought them like NPCs, but some had truly entered his heart, making him take them seriously, so his behavior was changing rapidly. For the teachers at Hogwarts, having a student like Alaric was both fortunate and painful. In any subject, he could grasp the content of the class in advance. In fact, Alaric's progress in his studies had already reached the level of a third-year student. This made the teachers feel somewhat ashamed, except for Professor Snape, because they felt they couldn't teach Alaric anything. All the knowledge he possessed was self-learned. Having already mastered the first-year curriculum, all the assignments were a piece of cake for him. On the evening of the day, when assignments were given, Allaric would provide the answers, which were often copied by his 3 roommates and then spread throughout Hogwarts the next day. This led to a situation where, for quite some time, Hogwarts professors faced a large pile of highly similar assignments every week with completely correct answers. However, this joyful plagiarism didn't last long. After clarifying the situation from some Slytherins who disliked Alaric, starting with Professor Snape, all the professors exempted Alaric from doing assignments. This special treatment caused wailing among the first-year students at Hogwarts, not out of jealousy, but because they could no longer get such perfect reference answers. Of course, many stories happened to Alaric in these 2 months. In summary, unknowingly, the first holiday of Hogwarts, Halloween, was approaching. On the eve of Halloween, when Alaric woke up early, he could smell the sweet and enticing aroma of roasted pumpkin wafting through the corridors. This morning, Ravenclaw and Gryffindor were scheduled to have charms class with Professor Flitwick. In this class, Professor Flitwick announced that he believed they could start making objects fly. Since they saw Professor Flitwick controlling Neville's warty toad to fly around the classroom in the previous lessons, students had been eagerly looking forward to trying this spell. Professor Flitwick divided the entire class into pairs to begin practicing. As usual, Alaric was self-studying, currently reading Magical Symbols Collection. Although he hadn't finished Advanced Runic Translation, basic books like Magical Symbols Collection, Rune Dictionary, and Magical Phonetic Chart no longer posed any difficulty for him. As for Hermione, being another recognized academic genius, she, as usual, was assigned to practice alone. In reality, the professors knew that her so-called individual practice was practicing with Alaric. Alright, don't forget the subtle wrist movements we've been practicing. Professor Flitwick stood on his pile of books as usual, shouting in his high-pitched voice. A flick and a swish, remember? A flick and a swish. And saying the magic words properly is very important too. Never forget Wizard Barufio, who said S instead of F and found himself on the floor with a buffalo on his chest. Laughter erupted from the students, filling the classroom with a joyful atmosphere. Suddenly, with a bang, a massive buffalo appeared out of thin air in the classroom, startling the young wizards. Everyone scattered and then gathered around, watching this giant creature. "Oh, who did this?" Professor Flitwick asked loudly, but it was clear he wasn't angry. "It was me, Professor," in the crowd. Alaric raised his hand. "I thought it was just a joke. Obviously, this is a genius spell, much more complex than the levitation charm." He cast a vanishing spell, making the buffalo, which was about to charge at the podium, disappear instantly in the classroom. Then he cast a reappearing spell, and the tables and chairs, which had been messed up by the buffalo's charge, instantly returned to their original state. Excellent spell, Professor Flitwick nodded appreciatively. Although it sounds like a joke, the buffalo curse itself is indeed a remarkable spell, but we won't discuss that now. He clapped his hands, announcing the start of the practice. The scene became chaotic for a while. Harry Potter and Seamus Finnegan, in their attempts, performed the flick and swish repeatedly, but the feather that should have been lifted remained motionless on the floor. In frustration, Seamus poked the feather with his wand, causing it to catch fire. Harry had to use his hat to extinguish the flames. On another table, Ron's luck didn't seem to improve. Wingardium Leviosa, he shouted loudly, waving his arms like windmills. You said it wrong, Hermione said bluntly beside him. Guided by Alaric, she succeeded after only 2 attempts. When she saw Ron clumsily trying, she couldn't help but offer her guidance as a self-proclaimed expert. It's Wingardium Leviosa. You have to say the Gar part long and clear. Since you're so clever, why don't you try it? Ron roared. Rolling up her sleeves, Hermione waved her wand, saying, Wingardium Leviosa. The feather rose from the table, hovering about 4 feet above Hermione's head. However, Ron's reaction to Hermione's guidance was quite sarcastic. Oh dear, know-it-all, miss. Why don't you stay with your equally brilliant boyfriend? Hermione's face turned black on the spot. After class, Alaric walked into the library with his books, but Hermione didn't follow. He thought Hermione had her own business and left. She had done this more than once, so Alaric didn't investigate further. On the eve of Halloween, the Great Hall of Hogwarts was redecorated. When Alaric entered the dining hall in the evening, he was greeted by a colorful array of Halloween decorations. 1,000 bats fluttered on the walls and ceiling, while another 1,000 formed a low, dark cloud hovering and dancing above the dining tables, causing the candles in the pumpkins to flicker. Delicious dishes suddenly appeared on golden plates, just like the feast on the opening day of school. Alaric didn't eagerly enjoy the food like other young wizards. He walked around the long tables, asking everyone if they had seen Hermione with Hungry, Himari following behind him. However, everyone said they hadn't seen her. Only Lisa Turpin, a Ravenclaw girl, mentioned that she had seen Hermione near the entrance to the restroom corridor. Hearing this, Alaric immediately thought of the plot in the original book. Hermione encountered the troll in that corridor. Even though Hermione, under his guidance, was much stronger than in the original story, she still wasn't a match for a troll. At least with her current magical power and spell proficiency, she had no way to deal with a troll's magical resistance. Alaric immediately ran out of the dining hall. However, halfway there, he suddenly saw Professor Quirrell rushing into the hall. His large scarf was crooked on his head, and his face was full of terrified expressions. Everyone stared at him, and he walked to Professor Dumbledore's chair, leaning on the table with a gasp, saying, "Troll in the underground chamber, thought you should know." After saying that, he collapsed to the floor, unconscious. The hall immediately became chaotic. Professor Dumbledore had to use his wand to produce several loud explosions of fireworks on top of his head before everyone quieted down. "Prefects," he said in a low voice, "lead your students to their dormitories immediately." On Ravenclaw's side, Penelope calmly gathered the small eagles and had them line up, leading them towards the tower. Only Alaric, who silently left, didn't follow, and nobody noticed. When it was confirmed that there was no one around, Alaric took out the pocket-sized Oriana from his pocket and placed it on the ground. "Now take me to the third-floor bathroom," he urgently said to Oriana. "The situation is critical. Hurry up, please." "Understood, Father," Oriana said cheerfully, and cast a spell. Of course, it was a spell from the Verolin magic. Her puppet instantly emitted a purple magical wave, shooting towards Oriana herself. After being hit by the magical wave, the shrinking spell effect on Oriana was instantly lifted, and she returned to her normal size. She then lifted Alaric, who was taller than her, into her arms and moved at high speed in a levitating state,